Nice.
Down here to the line with my question.
think senators were shorter.
None whatsoever.
It's such an honor to meet you. I saw your picture in the newspaper. You must be so... This is Senator Gillibrand. Oh man, what a proud day. This is great Americans. I want to believe in the American dream.
I welcome everyone to this very, very important hearing. Before we start, I'd like to state a few things. These are some ground rules, pretty much the same as what former chairman and my friend Senator Leahy and others have done, stated in the past. I want everyone to be able to watch the hearing without obstruction. If people stand up and block the view of those behind them or speak out of turn, it's not fair or considerate to others. So officers would then remove those individuals. I know that there's a lot to protest regarding this administration's policies, but this isn't the time or place to do it. Before I turn to our opening statements, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items and explain how we're going to proceed. Senator Leahy and I will give our opening statements. Then I will call on Senators Schumer and Gillibrand to introduce the nominee. Following Ms. Lynch's opening remarks, we'll begin with the first round of questions in which each senator will have 10 minutes. After the first round, we're going to do 8-minute rounds of questions. I want everyone to know that I'm prepared to stay here as long as members have questions that they'd like to ask. I think this is the most fair way to proceed, both to the responsibilities of the Senate and senators, and most importantly to the nominee who has to sit here through all of this and answer our questions. And I think we all know that this is a very important position in the cabinet, and we should do what we can to move it along within our rules. We have a lot of ground that we want to cover in live questioning. One final note on scheduling. I would like to take a short break of maybe 45 minutes, sometime around 12:30 or 1 o'clock. And I know that we have a series of stacked votes this afternoon. And in regard to, I think, 18 amendments we have to vote on, the plan right now is to keep this hearing going, even though it may be a very chaotic way to do things and maybe not as respectful to the position of Attorney General as ought to be, but I don't know how else to get through the process to get every question asked that wants to be asked. So I would ask that all of my colleagues remain very flexible and keep it going, and that means some accommodation by members on my side of the aisle to chair when I can't be here over there voting. With that, I'm going to turn to my opening statement, then immediately go to Senator Leahy. Ms. Lynch, I've had a chance to talk to you privately on 2 occasions. I welcome you to the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's a very big day for you, and especially for family and friends that are proud of you. I congratulate you on your nomination. You've already been confirmed by the Senate as U.S. Attorney, but the process involved to serve as the 83rd Attorney General is a bit more rigorous. For one thing, U.S. attorneys don't even have hearings, let alone one like this. So my hope is that we discuss some of the most important matters facing our nation. And in the process of doing that, then we'll get to know you a bit better. The fact of the matter is, this nomination comes at a pivotal time for the Department of Justice and for our country. And as I discuss some of those things, those are probably things you have had nothing to do with. But you have an opportunity to make some changes. The next Attorney General will face some very difficult challenges, from combating cybercrime to protecting our children from exploitation to helping fight the war on terror. But I'm not just concerned about the tough decisions that come with the office. There are challenges facing the Department of Justice that go to the heart of our system of government. How about restoring faith in the bedrock principles like respect for the rule of law and the fair and even-handed application of those laws? How about restoring respect for the co-equal branches of government? How about taking care that the law is faithfully executed and not rewritten? How about the Department of Justice honoring, once again, its longstanding duty to vigorously defend our nation's laws, even when political appointees disagree with the policy? Then there is the Office of Legal Counsel. I'm interested in returning that office to its rightful place as the impartial crown jewel of the Justice Department. Its opinion should be firmly rooted in the Constitution's text, neutral interpretation of statutes, and sound judicial precedent. They shouldn't be transparently self-serving attempts to justify whatever the President or an Attorney General wants to do for political reasons. And let me say it right here. The Office of Legal Counsel should be sharing with the American public the opinions it's providing to the President, especially when they supposedly sanction the unprecedented authority that the President claims to possess. And I'm going to work to see that it does. The public's business ought to be public. Transparency, I believe, and in fact does bring accountability. These ideals and principles are foundational to the Republic. But ideals and principles aren't simply academic, and they don't exist in a vacuum. Over the last few years, public confidence in the Department's ability to do its job without regard to politics has been shaken with good reason. It's not just Republicans who see the problem or who recognize it as a real-world effects on our own fellow Americans. The Department's own Inspector General listed as one of its top management challenges, quote, restoring confidence in the integrity, fairness, and accountability of the Department, end of quote. The IG cited several examples, including the Department's falsely denying basic facts in the Fast and Furious controversy. The Inspector General concluded this, quote, resulted in an erosion of trust in the department, end of quote. In that fiasco, our government knowingly allowed firearms to fall into the hands of international gun traffickers, and it led to the death of Patrol Agent Brian Terry. And then after Congress called on the leadership of the department to account for this foolish operation, what did they do? Did they apologize to the family and rush to uncover the truth? Quite the opposite. They denied, spun, and hid the facts from Congress and the American people. They bullied and intimidated whistleblowers, members of the press, and anyone who had audacity to investigate and to uncover the truth. The department has also failed to hold another government agency accountable, the Internal Revenue Service. We watched with dismay as that powerful agency was weaponized and turned against individual citizens. And why? What exactly did these fellow citizens do to make their government target them? They had the courage to get engaged and speak out in defense of faith, freedom, and our Constitution. And for what? They then were targeted by the IRS. What was the Justice Department's reaction to the targeting of citizens based on political beliefs? Well, they appointed a campaign donor to lead an investigation that hasn't gone anywhere and call it then a day. That simply isn't good enough. Meanwhile, the department's top litigator, the nation's Solicitor General, is arguing in case after case for breathtaking expansion of federal power. I'd like to have you consider this. Had the department prevailed in just some of the arguments that it pressed before the Supreme Court in the last several years, there would be essentially no limit on what the federal government could order states to do as a condition for receiving federal money. Another case, the Environmental Protection Agency could define a homeowner $75,000 a day for not complying with an order and then turn around and deny that homeowner any right to challenge the order or those fines in court when the order is issued. The federal government could review decisions by religious organizations regarding who can serve as a minister. The federal government could ban books that expressly advocate for the election or defeat of political candidates. And the Fourth Amendment wouldn't have anything to say about a police attaching a GPS device to a citizen's car without a warrant and constantly tracking their every movement for years or for months and years. These positions aren't mainstream in my judgment. At the end of the day, the common thread that binds all these challenges together, in my judgment, is a Department of Justice that is very deeply politicized. But that's what happens when an Attorney General of the United States views himself, and these are his own words, as the President's wingman. I don't expect Ms. Lynch, and I will agree on every issue, but I, for one, need to be persuaded that she will be an independent Attorney General, and I have no reason to believe at this point she won't be. The Attorney General's job is to represent the American people, not just the President, not just the executive branch. So today we will hear from Ms. Lynch. As far as I know, Ms. Lynch has nothing to do with the Department of Justice problems that I just outlined, but as new Attorney General, she can fix them. Tomorrow, we'll hear from a second panel of witnesses, many of whom will speak directly to the many challenges facing the Justice Department. As I listen to both panels, I'll be considering whether Ms. Lynch has what it takes to fix the Obama Justice Department. We need to get back then to first principles, and that starts with depoliticizing the Department of Justice, because the American people deserve it together. So I hope Ms. Lynch can fix these flaws. Senator Leahy.
Thank you. I won't speak as long because I just want to focus on Loretta Lynch and not on all the problems that some may see in this country. It is a pleasure to welcome her to this committee. She's smart, she's tough, she's hardworking, independent. She's a prosecutor's prosecutor, and her qualifications are beyond reproach. It's been unanimously confirmed by the Senate twice before to serve as the top federal prosecutor based in Brooklyn, New York. And I hope we have another swift confirmation for Ms. Lynch. As U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, she's brought terrorists and cyber criminals to justice. She's obtained convictions against corrupt public officials from both political parties. She's fought tirelessly against violent crime and financial fraud. She's remained determined to protect the rights of victims. Ms. Lynch has worked hard to improve the relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. And probably that's one of the reasons why her nomination enjoys strong support from both. She has prosecuted those who have committed crimes against police officers, as well as police officers who have committed crimes. Her record shows that as Attorney General, Ms. Lynch will effectively, fairly, and independently enforce the law. I hope we all remember that she is the nomination for Attorney General, and that's why I'm focusing on her. She was born in North Carolina, the daughter of a Baptist preacher and a school librarian. And we're honored to have members of her family here with us today, and I know you'll be introducing them later. She grew up hearing her family speak about living in the Jim Crow South, but she never lost faith that the way to obtain justice is through our legal system. And her nomination is historic. When she's confirmed as the 83rd Attorney General of the United States, she'll be the first African-American woman to lead the Department of Justice. Really, I can't think of anyone more deserving of that honor. She's going to lead a Justice Department that faces complex challenges. Nearly 1/3 of its budget goes to the Bureau of Prisons, and that drains vital resources from nearly all other public safety priorities. Think of that, 1/3 the budget goes to prisons. And a significant factor leading to this budget imbalance is the unnecessary creation of more and more mandatory minimum sentences. Passing new mandatory minimum laws become a convenient way for lawmakers to claim they're tough on crime, even when there's no evidence these sentences keep us safer. And it's one of the reasons why we have the largest prison population in the world. That's why I oppose mandatory minimums. I hope we can find a way to face this mass incarceration problem. And the Justice Department needs strong leadership to keep up with the rapid development of technology. We must stay ahead of the curve to prevent and fight threats to cybersecurity and data privacy. I think it would have been like the last few days in the Northeast if a cyber terrorist could have closed down all our electrical grids. The growing threat of cybercrime is very real, but also the specter of unchecked government intrusion into our private lives, particularly dragnet surveillance programs directed at American citizens. The intelligence community faces a critical deadline this June. 3 sections of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act are set to expire. I believe we have to protect our national security, but we also have to protect our civil liberties, which make us unique as a country. So we have to reform our nation's surveillance laws so we can realize both goals. The next Attorney General is going to play an essential role in protecting all Americans, all Americans. The President's selection for Attorney General, no matter who the President is, deserves to be considered swiftly, fairly, and on the nominee's own record. I believe Americans realize that a role this important cannot be used as just one more soundbite Washington political football. I'm confident that if we stay focused on Ms. Lynch's impeccable qualifications and fierce independence, she's going to be confirmed quickly by the Senate. She deserves a fair, thoughtful, and respectful confirmation process. And the American people deserve an Attorney General like Ms. Lynch. So I thank you for your years of public service. I look forward to your testimony.
For those of you who are new to a hearing, it's tradition that senators from home state introduce nominees from their state. So I'm now going to call on Senator Schumer and then Senator Gillibrand, senators from New York, to do that. And since we're under such a tight schedule, if I could ask you to keep it to 5 minutes, it'd be very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Leahy and the members of the committee. It's my great privilege to introduce Loretta Lynch, a proud New Yorker and the nominee to be the next Attorney General of the United States. Born in North Carolina, her father was a fourth-generation Baptist minister, a man who grew up in the segregated South, and her mother picked cotton when she was a girl so her daughter would never have to. Well, their daughter grew up to be one of the keenest legal minds our country has to offer, someone who has excelled at every stage of her education and her career, while cultivating a reputation as someone who is level-headed, fair, judicious, and eminently likable. If there's an American dream story, Ms. Lynch is it, and adding to the American dream story, Ms. Lynch's late brother Lorenzo was a Navy SEAL. Still, despite her intellectual and career achievements, Ms. Lynch has always been a nose-to-the-grindstone type, rarely seeking acclaim, only a job well done. She has earned a reputation for keeping her head down and avoiding the spotlight, just like me. At just over 5 foot, and with her consistent, understated approach to the public spotlight, some might underestimate Ms. Lynch. But as hundreds of criminals have learned the hard way, looks can be deceiving, and Ms. Lynch packs a powerful punch. When you look at the breadth and depth of the cases she's handled, it's clear Loretta Lynch is law enforcement's Renaissance woman. One I would mention, the Abner Louima case, where she convicted police officers who horribly abused a Haitian immigrant. As we have seen, these types of cases can create great tension between the police and the community. But despite the high-running emotions that accompanied this notorious case, Ms. Lynch was praised by lawyers on both sides, as well as community leaders and police officials, for her judicious, balanced, and careful approach. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, in this age of global terrorism, the AG's role in national security has never been more important. It makes apparent that the confirmation of a new Attorney General cannot and should not be delayed any longer. Today we've already heard, and we'll hear a lot more, about issues completely unrelated to Ms. Lynch's experience and her qualifications. If anything, that just goes to show how qualified she is. No one can assail Loretta Lynch, and no one has, who she is, what she has done, and how good an Attorney General she would be. So instead, some are trying to drag extraneous issues, executive orders on immigration, the IRS, into the fray to challenge her nomination because they can't find anything in her record to point to. Let me be clear. Attempts to politicize this nomination, to turn this exceptional nominee into a political point-scoring exercise, are a disservice to the qualified candidate we have before us today. I originally recommended Loretta Lynch for the position of U.S. Attorney in 1999 because I thought she was excellent. Sure enough, she was. When President Bush took office, she went to the private sector to earn some money. But when I had the opportunity to recommend a candidate to President Obama, I was certain I wanted Ms. Lynch to serve again. So I called her on a Friday afternoon. She was happy with her life in the law firm. But I was confident that with the weekend to think it over, she'd be drawn to answer the call to public service. And sure enough, her commitment to public service was so strong that she called me back on Monday to say yes. She passed unanimously out of the Senate twice already. Wouldn't it be nice if we could pass her unanimously out of the Senate a third time? Based on her record, we should. Mr. President, if we can't confirm Loretta Lynch, then I don't believe we can confirm anyone. And I would like to remind my colleagues that the President's immigration policies are not seeking confirmation today. Loretta Lynch is. When we move to vote, hopefully sooner rather than later, you won't be voting for or against the President's policies. You'll be voting on this eminently qualified law enforcement professional, first-rate legal mind, and someone who is committed in her bones to the equal application of justice for all people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Leahy. I am honored to be here today with Senator Schumer to introduce United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Loretta Lynch, as President Obama's nominee to serve as the next Attorney General for the United States. To serve as United States Attorney General requires deep experience in the field of law. It also requires a brilliant intellect, and it requires a steady moral compass. I have met with Ms. Lynch 2 months ago, and I can tell you she meets all of those criteria. She is strong, tough, independent, and fearless. And as one of our country's most accomplished and distinguished women serving in law enforcement, I urge my colleagues to support her nomination. She is an outstanding candidate for this job. Ms. Lynch began her service as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York in 1990, where she rose quickly to serve as Chief of the Long Island office and then Deputy Chief of General Crimes and Chief of Intake and Arraignments. For 15 years, she has been a prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York, and since 2010, she has served admirably as the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. In that position, she has demonstrated a superior sense of judgment and remarkable legal expertise. Ms. Lynch has dealt with an impressive array of cases on subjects ranging from civil rights to organized crime to terrorism. These are each issues that our new Attorney General will have to engage with constantly from day one of her tenure. Ms. Lynch's experience as a federal prosecutor in New York will undoubtedly serve her exceptionally well in Washington. She is extraordinarily well qualified, and I believe she deserves a quick confirmation process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. It's now, just as soon as the table is cleared, it's going to give Ms. Lynch an opportunity to come, and before yes, that's right. Before you seat yourself, would you take an oath, please? Would you raise your hand, and I'll give the oath. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. The committee welcomes you, and I know that it's an honor for all of us to have you before us, but it's also an honor for you to be selected by the President, and it's quite an honor for your family. So I would ask, if before you make your statement, if you would like to introduce anybody to the committee and speak about them any way you want to. And then if there's people that aren't introduced by you that you would like to have their name in the record and you'd submit their names, I'd be glad to include that in the record. So would you proceed as you choose? I think the microphone is not automatic.
Thank you, Senator. Let me introduce for the record, I'm delighted to welcome numerous family and friends here with me today. I'd like to introduce first and foremost my father, the source of my inspiration in so many ways. He's to my immediate left, the Reverend Lorenzo Lynch.
Thank you.
Immediately to his left is my husband, Stephen Hargrove, who has supported me in all of my endeavors, no matter how poor they make us. Immediately to his left is my younger brother, the Reverend Leonzo Lynch, who is the 5th generation of ministers in a direct line in my family, and my sister-in-law, Nicole Lynch.
Okay.
I'm also here with several other family members and friends whom I would love to introduce, but I am informed that you have a schedule for the afternoon, so I will keep to that. But let me say to all of them how tremendously gratified I am for their support, not just today, but over the years. Chairman Grassley, Senator Leahy, distinguished members of this committee, I'm honored to appear before you in this historic chamber among so many dedicated public servants. I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I also want to thank President Obama for the trust he has placed in me by nominating me to serve as Attorney General of the United States. It's a particular privilege to be joined here today by the members of my family that I've introduced, as well as the other numerous family and friends who have come to support me and for whose travel and service I'm so appreciative. Mr. Chairman, one of the privileges, and in fact one of my favorite things, in my position as United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York is welcoming new attorneys into my office and administering to them the oath of office. It is a transformative moment in the life of a young prosecutor, and one that I actually remember well. And as they stand before me, prepared to pledge their honor and their integrity, I remind them that they are making their oath not to me, not to the office, not even to the Attorney General, but to our Constitution, the fundamental foundation for all that we do. It is to that document and the ideals embodied therein that I have devoted my professional life. And Senators, if confirmed as Attorney General, I pledge to you today and to the American people that the Constitution, the bedrock of our system of justice, will be my lodestar as I exercise the power and the responsibility of that position. I owe so much to those who have worked to make the promise of that document real for all Americans, beginning with my own family. All of them, and so many others, have supported me on the path that has brought me to this moment, not only through their unwavering and love and support, which is so beautifully on display today, but through their examples and the values that have shaped my upbringing. My mother, Lorene, who was unable to travel here today, is a retired English teacher and librarian for whom education was the key to a better life. She still recalls people in her rural North Carolina community pressing a dime or a quarter into her hands to help support her college education. As a young woman, she refused to use segregated restrooms because they did not represent the America in which she believed. She instilled in me an abiding love of literature and learning, and taught me the value of hard work and sacrifice. My father, Lorenzo, who is here with me today, is a fourth-generation Baptist preacher who in the early 1960s opened his Greensboro church to those planning sit-ins and marches, standing with them while carrying me on his shoulders. He has always matched his principles with his actions, encouraging me to think for myself, but reminding me that we all gain the most when we act in service to others. It was the values my parents instilled in me that led me to the Eastern District of New York. And from my parents, I gained the tenacity and the resolve to take on violent criminals, to confront political corruption, and to disrupt organized crime. They also gave me the insight and the compassion to sit with the victims of crime and share their loss. Their values have sustained me, as I have twice had the privilege, indeed the honor, of serving as United States Attorney, leading an exceptional office staffed by outstanding public servants, and their values guide and motivate me even today. Senators, should I be confirmed as Attorney General, my highest priorities will continue to be to ensure the safety of all of our citizens, to protect the most vulnerable among us from crime and abuse, and to strengthen the vital relationships between America's brave law enforcement officers and the communities they are entrusted to serve. In a world of complex and evolving threats, protecting the American people from terrorism must remain the primary mission of today's Department of Justice. If confirmed, I will work with colleagues across the executive branch to use every available tool to continue disrupting the catastrophic attacks planned against our homeland and to bring terrorists to justice. I will draw upon my extensive experience in the Eastern District of New York, which has tried more terrorism cases since 9/11 than any other office. We have investigated and prosecuted terrorist individuals and groups that threaten our nation and its people, including those who have plotted to attack New York City's subway system, John F. Kennedy Airport, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and U.S. troops stationed abroad, as well as those who have provided material support to foreign terrorist organizations. And I pledge to discharge my duties, always mindful of the need to protect not just American citizens, but American values. If confirmed, I intend to expand and enhance our capabilities in order to effectively prevent ever-evolving attacks in cyberspace, to expose those wrongdoers and bring those perpetrators to justice as well. In my current position, I'm proud to lead an office that has significant experience prosecuting complex international cybercrime, including high-tech intrusions at key financial and public sector institutions. If I am confirmed, I will continue to use the combined skills and experience of our law enforcement partners, the Department's criminal and national security divisions, and the United States attorney community to defeat and hold accountable those who would imperil the safety and security of our citizens through cybercrime. I will also do everything I can to ensure that we are safeguarding the most vulnerable among us. During my tenure as U.S. Attorney, the Eastern District of New York has led the prosecution against financial fraudsters who have callously targeted hard-working Americans, including the deaf, the elderly, and stolen not just their trust, but their hard-earned savings. We have taken action against abusers in over 100 child exploitation and child pornography cases, and we have prosecuted brutal international human trafficking rings that have sold victims as young as 14 and 15 into sexual slavery. If confirmed as Attorney General, I will continue to build upon the Department's record of vigorously prosecuting those who prey on those most in need of our protection, and I will continue to provide strong and effective assistance to survivors who we must both support and empower. Senators, throughout my career as a prosecutor, it has been my signal honor to work hand in hand with dedicated law enforcement officers and agents who risk their lives every day in the protection of the communities we all serve. I have served with them. I have learned from them. I am a better prosecutor because of them. Few things have pained me more than the recent reports of tension and division between law enforcement and the communities we serve. If confirmed as Attorney General, one of my key priorities would be to work to strengthen the vital relationships between our courageous law enforcement personnel and all of the communities we serve. In my career, I have seen this relationship flourish. I have seen law enforcement forge unbreakable bonds with community residents, and I have seen violence-ravaged communities come together to honor officers who have risked all to protect them. And as Attorney General, I will draw all voices into this important discussion. In that same spirit, I look forward to fostering a new and improved relationship with this committee, the United States Senate, and the entire United States Congress, a relationship based on mutual respect and constitutional balance. Ultimately, I know we all share the same goal and commitment to protect and to serve the American people. Now, I recognize that we face many challenges in the years ahead, but I have seen in my own life and in my own family how dedicated men and women can answer the call to achieve great things for themselves, for their country, and for generations to come. My father, that young minister who carried me on his shoulders, has answered that call, as has my mother, that courageous young teacher who refused to let Jim Crow define her. Standing with them are my uncles and cousins who served in Vietnam, one of whom is here to support me today, and my older brother, a Navy SEAL, all of whom answered that call with their service to our country. Senators, as I come before you today in this historic chamber, I still stand on my father's shoulders, as well as on the shoulders of all of those who have gone before me and who dreamed of making the promise of America a reality for all and worked to achieve that goal. I believe in the promise of America because I have lived the promise of America. And if confirmed to be Attorney General of the United States, I pledge to all of you and the American people that I will fulfill my responsibilities with integrity and independence. I will never forget that I serve the American people from all walks of life who continue to make our nation great, as well as the legacy of all of those whose sacrifices have made us free. And I will always strive to uphold the trust that has been placed in me to protect and defend our Constitution, to safeguard our people, and to stand as the leader and public servant that they deserve. Thank you all once again for your time and your consideration. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. I look forward to your questions and to all that we may accomplish in the days ahead, together, in the spirit of cooperation, shared responsibility, and justice. Thank you for your time today.
And thank you, Ms. Lynch, for that statement. Before my 10 minutes starts for the first round, I'd like to talk to my colleagues just a minute because of the 18 votes that are coming up this afternoon and because of a chaotic situation. And the most important thing is getting this hearing over in one sitting, in one day, even if it goes into the evening. I hope my colleagues will be cognizant of what we normally do. Between Senator Leahy and I, we're fairly liberal on letting people go over, and whether we have 5, 7, or 10-minute rounds in any hearing, my practice is generally if you got 1 second left, you can ask a question, but this time I would prefer that you kind of stick to the 10 minutes, and I'm not very good at gaveling people down, so take care of my timidity, will you please? Now, again, before the first 10 minutes starts, I'd like to make something clear just for myself. I can't speak for my colleagues. And it takes off on two things. One, what you said about you wanted to improve relationships with the committee and with Congress. We welcome that very much, and that will be very, very helpful, particularly in regard to our responsibilities of oversight. Secondly, taking off on something Senator Schumer said, and just speaking for myself, if I use this subject or that subject or another as a basis of maybe questioning what the President or an Attorney General has done, I want it clear that that's not the issue for me now. The issue is whether or not the Constitution or the laws have been violated or whether the Justice Department has acted in an appropriate way. So now I would start with my questions. On November the 20th last year, President Obama announced that he would defer deportation of millions of individuals in the country undocumented. Not only is this action contrary to our laws, it's a dangerous abuse of executive authority. If you're confirmed as the next Attorney General before you take office, you will take an oath. You will raise your right hand and swear, quote, support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to bear true and false faith, true faith and allegiance to the same, end of quote. Your duty as Attorney General is not to defend the President and his policies. Your duty is your oath to defend the Constitution. So my first question, with that oath in mind, I ask you, do you believe that the President has the legal authority to unilaterally defer deportations in a blanket manner for millions of individuals in the country illegally and grant them permits and other benefits regardless of what the U.S. Constitution or immigration laws say?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And you've raised a very important issue of how we manage the issue of undocumented immigrants here in our country while still welcoming those who bring such great value to our shores, to our business community, and to our culture. Certainly, I was not involved in the decisions that led to the executive actions that you reference, and I am not aware of, at this point, how the Department of Homeland Security has set forth regulations to actually implement that. So I can't comment on the particulars of what will happen. I have had occasion to look at the Office of Legal Counsel opinion through which the Department of Homeland Security sought legal guidance there, as well as some of the letters from constitutional scholars who've looked at the similar issue. And certainly it seems to be a reasonable discussion of legal precedent, the relevant statute, congressional actions, along with the enforcement discretion of the agency. And I don't see any reason to doubt the reasonableness of those views. I do think, however, that the ultimate responsibility of the Department of Justice is to always, when presented with issues by the White House or any agency, to review those issues carefully, to apply the relevant law, and make a determination as to whether or not there is a legal framework that supports the requested action. And I found it interesting as I was reading the legal counsel opinion that some of the proposals that were set forth and asked about, the Office of Legal Counsel opined did not, in fact, have a legal framework, and I don't believe that those were actually implemented. So I do think it is very important that as the Department of Justice, through any of its agencies, be it the Office of Legal Counsel or in a direct conversation with the President or any other member of Cabinet, always ensure that they are operating from a position of whether or not there is a legal framework that supports the requested action. And the advice provided must be thorough, it must be objective, and it must be completely independent.
Let me take off on one word you used, discretion, and I presume that may have applied to prosecutorial discretion. That was part of the President's rationale. If this is lawfully exercised on an individual basis, depending on the facts of a specific case, it is, in fact, case by case. So this is not so much a philosophical question as a practical thing. What it doesn't allow anybody to do is tell whole categories of people that the law won't apply to them going forward. No one seriously disputes these broad principles. Even the Office of Legal Counsel opinion on the President's executive action accepts them. So let me ask you this. What are the outer limits of the doctrine of prosecutorial discretion? And why don't the President's actions exceed those boundaries? When we're talking about millions of people, how does this action realistically allow for a case-by-case exercise of discretion?
Senator, as I reviewed the opinion and looked at the issues presented therein from the perspective of my career as a prosecutor and as a United States attorney, and applying those principles of the exercise of discretion, I viewed it as a way in which the Department of Homeland Security was seeking legal guidance on the most effective way to prioritize the removal of large numbers of individuals, given that the resources would not permit removal of everyone who fell within the respective category. And that certainly was the framework from which I viewed that. And looking at it from that perspective, the Department of Homeland Security's request and suggestion that they, in fact, prioritize the removal of the most dangerous of the undocumented immigrants among us, those who have criminal records, those who are involved in national security and terrorism, those who are involved in gang activity, violent crime, along with, I believe, people who have recently entered and could pose a threat to our system, seem to be a reasonable way to marshal limited resources to deal with the problem. As a prosecutor, however, I've had experience, obviously, in doing similar things, in finding the best way to attack a serious problem with limited resources. But as a prosecutor, I always want the ability to still take some sort of action against those who may not be in my initial category as the most serious threat. And I didn't see anything in the opinion that prevented action being taken from individuals who might otherwise qualify for the deferral. Again, I'm not aware of how the department will actually go forward and implement by regulation this matter. I haven't had the occasion to study that, and I don't know, in fact, if those are out. Certainly, if I'm confirmed as Attorney General, I look forward to learning more about that process and making sure that we're using all of our resources to protect the American people, particularly against the dangerous offenders who rightfully stand at the top of the removal list.
Yeah. Well, I think you're telling me that you can do it for a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of people that maybe have committed a crime or something, but it seems to me to be common sense would dictate that it's impossible to do prosecutorial discretion the way it's traditionally been done on an individual basis for the millions that are left over. Let's move on. I'd like to move away from the President's refusal to enforce the law and talk a little bit about this administration's failure to apply the law in an even-handed way. According to this goes to the IRS. According to the Treasury Department Inspector General, now that's not me, the Inspector General, the IRS used inappropriate criteria to deny tax-exempt status to predominantly conservative organizations, ask unnecessary questions, and lastly, slowed approval of their application. Initially, President Obama remarked that any IRS actions to the to target conservatives would be, quote, unquote, outrageous. Then last February, the president said there wasn't, quote, even a smidgen of corruption in what occurred at the IRS, a smidgen of corruption, unquote. Yet, a few months later, in June, the director of the FBI, Director Comey, testified before the House Judiciary Committee that there was a, quote, very active, unquote, ongoing criminal investigation into the matter. So this brings me to these questions. I'd like to know how to reconcile these two statements. If what the president said was accurate, then why in the world would the FBI be conducting an ongoing criminal investigation? A rhetorical question. Would the FBI investigation be just for show? I'm going to take Director Comey at his word. So if there is an ongoing criminal investigation at the FBI, then how could it be appropriate for the president to reach a conclusion about the facts before Director Comey?
Thank you, sir. And let me state at the outset that with regards to the actions of any of the agencies of our government, there is certainly no place for bias or favoritism or anything other than the even-handed application of the relevant laws and regulations. And certainly that has always been my goal as a prosecutor and would be my continued goal should I be confirmed. With respect to the IRS investigation, I am generally aware that there is an investigation going on, but it's not a matter that is either being conducted by my office or that I've been briefed on as United States Attorney. So I'm not able to comment on the status now, except to state that I do.
Based on what you just said, then I can shorten this up by asking you this question. You've spent a career in law enforcement. When would it ever be appropriate for any president to know the results of a criminal investigation and then comment on it publicly while the investigation is still ongoing?
Senator, with respect to this investigation or any other, I'm not aware of the context or the basis for the President's remarks, so I'm not able to determine whether or not they were in fact done after any evaluation of the investigation or whether they were a matter of opinion. So I'm not able to comment on that specific remark. Certainly, as part of the Department of Justice exercise of its powers, whether at the U.S. Attorney level or here in Washington, investigations are handled independently and without provision of materials or information about them before their conclusion to others in the executive branch or other agencies.
Senator Leahy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been fortunate that my native state of Vermont has allowed me to serve here for 4 decades. I've listened in several different committees I've been on to a lot of statements by nominees. I cannot think of one that is so moving as your statement. And I intend to make sure I have send copies to all members of my family and other friends.
You told me that last night.
You know, my years in law enforcement as state's attorney in Vermont gave me a lot of respect for the difficult and dangerous work we as police officers to do every day. I know the toll it can take not only on the officer, but oftentimes on their families.
Yes.
I've tried to support the work of law enforcement to keep our communities safe. They have to have the resources they need, whether it's bulletproof vests or funding for innovative criminal justice efforts. I've also been deeply moved by the tragic events in Ferguson, New York. They have focused on what we know is a reality, oftentimes or sometimes strained relations between law enforcement and the communities they serve. I appreciate your reference to that in your statement. But you've worked very hard as a U.S. attorney to bring both law enforcement and the communities together. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think you've raised one of the most important issues facing our country today, which is the need to resolve the tensions that appear to be discussed and appear to be rising between law enforcement and the communities that we serve. In my experience as a prosecutor and United States attorney, these tensions are best dealt with by having discussions between all parties so that everyone feels that their voice has been heard. With respect to our brave law enforcement officers, we ask so much of them. We ask them to keep us safe. We ask them to protect us literally from ourselves. and we ask them to do it, often without the resources that they need to be safe and secure themselves. Yet they still stand up every day and risk their lives for us. Many of our community residents, because of a host of factors, feel disconnected from government in general today, and when they interact with law enforcement, transfer that feeling to them as well, even if someone is there to help. What I have found most effective is getting people together and simply listening to their concerns, being open, helping them see that, in fact, we are all in this together, and that the concerns of law enforcement, a safe society, a free society, are the exact same concerns of every resident of every community there.
And would you agree that that's something that has to be considered by not only federal law enforcement, but by state and local law enforcement, and that the federal government can help the state and local law enforcement in that respect?
Absolutely, Senator. One of the most important roles that the Department of Justice plays is not necessarily its most visible role, but it is the support that we provide to state and local law enforcement partners through our grant program and through our training program. We try our best to provide them with the resources that they need to carry out their jobs safely and effectively.
You know, we all know that no prosecutor's office has the resources to prosecute every single crime before it, and you have to decide which ones have priority. Let me talk about one. In state court, there was a case where a child rapist received 2 years. You obviously disagreed with that. You brought federal charges, and I think of Bill O'Reilly on Fox called you a hero and said, quote, "You should be respected by all Americans for standing up to gross injustice." And I agree with Bill O'Reilly on that. How do you make, well, let me back up. More and more of the Justice Department's budget, as I said earlier, is going now into our federal prison system. So you have limited resources. How do you make these kind of judgments? How do you determine which cases are the important ones you have to go, and also the very difficult thing, realizing if you go after certain cases, it means you don't have the resources to go after others?
Certainly, Senator. One of the privileges of being the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York has been the ability to work with so many of my United States Attorney colleagues across the country. All of us engage in this process every day, and we start with a full and frank evaluation with our law enforcement partners of the crime issues facing our particular districts. We try and determine what are the greatest threats to the people that we have sworn to serve. And that is what I do in the Eastern District of New York every day. We then look at our resources and set priorities and goals to achieve the safest communities that we can. But, Senator, we do have to always maintain the flexibility to look at specific cases, such as the Goodman case, and determine if a federal interest exists and if, in fact, a victim has not been protected and has not been heard, and use federal resources there as well.
Well, let me go into one that takes resources, but we've had some people say, gosh, if you got terrorists, lock them up in Guantanamo, even though we know what that has cost the American people, both in respect abroad and in dollars. You've successfully prosecuted a number of terrorism cases in the Eastern District of New York. Cases against individuals, as you said, plotting against John F. Kennedy Airport, Federal Reserve Bank, and so on. Just this month, you charged 2 al-Qaeda members for attacking American troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've been impressed not only in your district, but in other parts of the country, where we've actually brought these terrorists to trial in our federal courts. We've shown the rest of the world we can do it. There's been convictions, Osama bin Laden's son-in-law being one, and then they've been locked up. Now, do you find the criminal justice system, I think I know your answer, as an important counterterrorism tool?
Senator, it is certainly an important counterterrorism tool in the arsenal of tools that we have to deal with this ever-growing and ever-evolving threat. Let me say that at the outset, my view is that if terrorists threaten American citizens here or abroad, they will face American justice. We work with our counterparts throughout the executive branch to determine, based on every case, the most appropriate venue for bringing terrorists to justice, as our primary goal is to incapacitate them and prevent further destruction. Certainly within my own career as U.S. Attorney, when the decision has been made that the case should be handled by a U.S. Attorney's office, we proceed in that fashion. We also work closely, however, with the Office of Military Commissions and consult with them and share information to make those decisions as to what is, in fact, the best way to manage every case.
And then as these cases come to you, I'm going to ask you a question I've asked each of the most recent Attorney General nominees. And I say this because I think of the tremendous effort of the Senator from California, Senator Feinstein, who's sitting here, her tremendous efforts to confront acts of torture carried out in our country's name. Do you agree that waterboarding is torture and that it's illegal?
Waterboarding is torture, Senator.
And thus illegal.
And thus illegal.
Thank you. And I know you're going to be asked a lot about immigration. Well, it makes me think we should be focusing on your qualifications for this job. Might even asking those questions might speak also to some of the qualifications of Congress. We worked for months in this committee, night and day, hundreds of hours, hearings, markups, debate, and we passed by a strong bipartisan majority an immigration bill that referenced so many of these things that we now hear discussed. My opinion, there were votes enough to pass it in the House of Representatives, but their leadership decided not to bring it up. I think that was a mistake. So now we deal with the question of executive action. You didn't write the executive action. You weren't consulted about it, were you?
No, I was not aware of it until it was rendered.
And would you say if you got millions of people in this country who may not be in a valid or legal status, it would perhaps strain our resources to think about how we would deport 10 to 12 million people. Would that be a fair statement?
I believe that statement is fair, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hatch is the next one, but I wanted to inform all the committee members that since everybody on the committee was here at the fall of the gavel, it will be done on a seniority basis as opposed to first come, first serve basis. Senator Hatch is next.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Ms. Lynch, welcome to the Judiciary Committee.
Thank you.
Appreciate the service you've given in this country. I'm impressed with your qualifications, and I hope I can support your nomination. It's important to hear what you understand your role and duty will be. Do you agree that when the constitutionality of a law is challenged, the Attorney General has a duty to defend that law if reasonable arguments can be made?
Senator, I believe that one of the first and foremost duties of the Department of Justice is to defend the laws as passed by this body.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to answer these questions. I'm trying to get through a number of them. I think you can answer most of them yes or no if you can. If you are confirmed, will you commit to enforce and defend the laws and the Constitution of the United States regardless of your personal and philosophical views on any matter?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that. Attorney General Holder answered that same question in the same way. The Justice Department had made reasonable arguments that the Defense of Marriage Act is constitutional, but then the Attorney General chose to stop making those arguments because of his personal views. And by breaking his promise, he cast doubt about others who make the same commitment as you did today. Now, I don't doubt your sincerity. We've met together, and I have a high opinion of you. But is there any more assurance that you can give us on something like that?
Senator, it's my view that when it comes to the position of the Attorney General and the role of the Department of Justice in defending the statutes as passed by this Congress, the issue is not my personal view or any issue of bias or policy even. but it is the duty and responsibility of the Department of Justice to defend those statutes. Certainly, as we've seen, there may be rare instances where, and again, I was not involved in those in that analysis, but there may be certain circumstances where careful legal analysis raises constitutional issues. But I anticipate those would be few and far between. I also think that should we reach that point, if there is a matter, it's a matter that I would prefer to have discussion about.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. I'm concerned that the administration has exceeded its lawful authority in several ways in an effort to avoid working with us up here in Congress. Now, I understand why they might not want to work with Congress from time to time, but unfortunately, the Constitution requires us to work together. And that the Justice Department has actually facilitated this pattern of behavior, some people believe. The Department has done so in a number of ways, in exceeding and even contravening lawful authority in the programs it helps administer, such as with the latest executive actions on immigration, in purporting to provide legal justification for other agencies to ignore the law, as apparently occurred with the transfer of Taliban terrorists out of Guantanamo without notifying Congress, which is an obligation, and in taking some extreme litigation positions, which by my count, the Supreme Court has unanimously rebuked a record 20 times. Given these disturbing patterns, how can you assure us that you'll be independent, that you'll say no to the White House or other executive branch agencies when they wish to act beyond the law as it's written?
Senator, I think one of the most important functions of the Department of Justice is to provide a legal framework, if it exists, when questions are raised.
Right.
But consistent with that, every good lawyer knows you must also provide the information that indicates that the legal framework may not exist for certain actions that someone may want to take. Every lawyer has to be independent. The Attorney General even more so. And I pledge to you that I take that independence very seriously.
Well, you did that in my office, and I appreciate that, because I think you'll be a great Attorney General if you'll do that. Last August, you gave a speech in Switzerland in which you praised Attorney General Holder's initiative to limit mandatory minimum sentences only to some of the criminals who Congress said should receive them. But prosecutors, including even the Attorney General, do not have authority to decide that entire categories of defendants will not receive a sentence that the Congress has mandated. Isn't that another example of using prosecutorial discretion to really, in effect, change the law without Congress?
Senator, with respect to the material that you're referring to, when I did give that speech, I was referring to the Department's Smart on Crime initiative, which seeks to manage another intractable problem of the large number of narcotics defendants and the limited resources that we have to handle those defendants and prosecute them.
I want to help you with that.
Yes, and prosecute them effectively. In fact, in my own experience, both as an assistant United States attorney and United States attorney, we've had to deal with similar issues in the Eastern District of New York. We've had tremendous issues with narcotics importations over the years, and we have had to work out ways of resolving those cases. Many of them go to trial, but we also have had to prioritize the cases that we will seek mandatory minimums for and those which we will seek guideline sentences for. But importantly, with respect to the Smart on Crime initiative, as pushed out and has been implemented in the field, every prosecutor, from the United States attorney on down to line assistants, are encouraged to still consider cases that might fall into a category where initially you would not seek a mandatory minimum, but consider whether they would be appropriate. Okay. And those cases have occurred, and they will continue to occur.
Okay, I understand. As currently written, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, or ECPA, requires only a subpoena for law enforcement to access email that has been opened, even though a search warrant would be required for a printout of the same communications sitting on a desk. To make matters more complicated, ECPA is silent on the privacy standard for accessing data stored abroad. Without an actual legal framework in place, this puts the privacy of American citizens at risk for intrusion by foreign governments. In the coming days, I intend to reintroduce the LEADS Act, which will promote international comedy and law enforcement cooperation. Will you commit to working with me on this important subject? Because it's important we solve these problems.
Senator, the subject of electronic privacy is central to so many of our freedoms. And as you point out, in an era of ever-changing technology, we have to be vigilant to make sure that we are not only providing law enforcement the tools it needs, but protecting our citizens' privacy. And I certainly commit to you to working with you on this important legislation and all the issues that will flow from it.
Well, thank you so much. Trade secrets are among the most valuable assets for American companies and currently are protected under federal criminal law by the Economic Espionage Act and by an array of state civil laws. Unlike other forms of intellectual property, however, there is no federal civil remedy for trade secret owners. I will reintroduce the Defend Trade Secrets Act in the coming days with Senator Coons to provide an efficient federal remedy for trade secret owners. Do you agree that trade secret owners should have the same access to a federal remedy as owners of other forms of intellectual property?
Senator, I think that the issue of trade secrets, again, particularly as American technology becomes ever more complex and becomes ever more a target from those both in the U.S. and without who would seek to steal it, is an increasingly important issue. And I look forward to working with you to consider that statute. I'm not familiar with the provision that you raised, but it certainly touches on an important issue of making sure that our companies and their technology are protected.
Well, thank you so much. I am today introducing legislation to help victims of child pornography receive the restitution that Congress has already said they deserve. The Supreme Court said last year that the current restriction statute enacted more than 20 years ago does not work for child pornography victims, and this legislation will change that. I am joined by more than 30 senators on both sides of the aisle, including 14 on this committee. Do I have your commitment that under your leadership, the Justice Department will aggressively prosecute child pornography and use tools like this legislation to help victims get the restitution they need to put their lives back together?
Senator, throughout my career, I have expressed a commitment to prosecuting those who would seek to harm our children, be it through child pornography or the actual abuse of children, which often go hand in hand. You certainly raise important issues about how can we make these victims whole, and I look forward to working with you and the members of this committee in reviewing that legislation as well.
Thank you so much. Now, I recently read a powerful book, read it in one day. It's titled License to Lie: Uncovering Corruption in the Department of Justice. The author writes about many things, including the debacle that occurred in the misguided prosecution of Senator Ted Stevens, which I thought was out of this world bad. I was one of the people who testified as to his character, and he was a person of great character. And as you know, he lost the Senate race because of this type of prosecution. I know that case. Ted Stevens was a dear friend of mine, and I testified on his behalf, as I said. Only after he was convicted did we learn that the Justice Department prosecutors intentionally hid exculpatory evidence that could have helped his case. Now, these were not mistakes. They were corrupt acts that violated every prosecutor's duty under the Brady v. Maryland decision to turn over exculpatory evidence so that the trial will be fair. Now, I recommend that you read this book, because if even half of it is true, and I believe it is true, you have a lot of work to do to clean up that department. Will you consider doing that for me?
Thank you, sir. I will.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Before I call on Senator Feinstein, I'm going to ask, just as soon as the Finance Committee convenes, I'm going to offer an amendment. So I'd ask the most senior Republican to watch the time and call on the next person in seniority order. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Lynch, I sat through 6 opening statements by potential attorneys general, and I just want to tell you, yours was the best.
Thank you.
I see the combination of steel and velvet. I see your effectiveness before a jury. I see your love for the Constitution, and I see the determination which is in your heart and I think your being. And it's very, very impressive. So I want to thank you for really 30 years of service.
Thank you, Senator.
And I hope it'll be a lot longer. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to place in the record Los Angeles Police Department's Chief's Charlie Beckett's written testimony on the subject of the President's executive action on immigration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lynch, I'm going to ask you the 3 questions. The first is on expiring provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which will come to this committee before June of this year, and also before the Intelligence Committee on which I serve. A question about Office of Legal Counsel opinions, and a question on the State Secrets Act. Let me begin with FISA. The 3 provisions that are going to expire on June 1 are, first, the roving wiretap authority. This provision enables the government to maintain surveillance on a target when he or she switches phone numbers or email addresses without seeking a new court order. The second is the lone wolf authority, which enables the government to conduct surveillance of a non-United States person engaged in international terrorism without demonstrating that they are affiliated with a particular international terrorist group, such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And the third is the Business Records Authority, which carries with it Section 215 of the National Security Administration. This enables the government to obtain a court order directing the production of, quote, any tangible thing, end quote, that's relevant to an authorized national security investigation. Can you describe for us the importance of these 3 provisions, and what would be the operational impact if the 3 were allowed to sunset in June?
Thank you, Senator. You certainly raise important issues about the need to have a full panoply of investigative tools and techniques to deal with the ever-evolving threat that terrorism presents against us. With respect to the provisions that you refer to, I think I've always found it most interesting that the roving wiretap provision is actually a provision that was incorporated into the FISA statute after being utilized extensively for several years in narcotics prosecutions. It was one with which I was familiar as a young prosecutor, as many of my colleagues across the country were as well. And the ability to describe to a court the nature of the offense, the nature of the activity, and the use of attempts to shield oneself from electronic surveillance, which is part of what must be set forth in an application, have been invaluable tools. Of particular importance is the fact that all of this must go to a court. Obviously, in the narcotics area, it was an Article III court. In the FISA area, it is to the FISA court. But there is judicial review for this, and it has been an important part of the techniques we have used in the war on terror, as have the other 2 provisions that you mentioned. I do think, however, that with respect to FISA, there's always the ability, there's always the need to make sure that we are current, not just with technology, but with the most effective way to protect privacy as we go forward in this important act. I know that's something that you've spent a great deal of time on, as well as many of your colleagues on this committee, as well as on the Intelligence Committee. And I look forward to continuing those discussions with you, should I be confirmed. With respect to the lone wolf provision, again, I think we have to obviously examine it carefully. Recent events, however, have underscored the importance of this as an issue in the war on terror. And so I would hope that we could move forward with any proposed changes to FISA with a full and complete understanding of the risks that we are still facing. And if any changes need to be made, again, after full and fair consideration with this committee, with the Intelligence Committee, and the discussions that we need to have, making sure that we can still provide law enforcement with the tools that they need. Similarly, with Section 215, I believe that the court order provision in there is an effective check, and certainly a necessary check as we gather data from all types of sources. As I've always said, I'm certainly open to discussions about how they can be best modified, if we need to modify them, consistent with the goals of protecting the American people. And I commit to you, Senator, and indeed to all of this committee, that I will always listen to all those concerns, be it about the FISA statute or any of the techniques we are using in the war on terror.
Thank you very much. As a member of both Judiciary and Intelligence, we have on both committees sought access to Office of Legal Counsel opinions, called OLC opinions. And these opinions often represent the best and most comprehensive expression of the legal basis for intelligence activities Congress is actually charged with overseeing. So without these opinions, you don't really know the legal basis upon which an administration has based certain activities. And it's been very frustrating to us. In particular, executive branch officials have previously advised the committee of the existence of a seminal OLC opinion written by Ted Olson decades ago governing the conduct of collection activities under Executive Order 12333. My question is, could we have your commitment that you will make a copy of this OLC opinion available to members of both the Intelligence and the Judiciary Committee? Probably your first tough question.
Well, Senator, I think that with respect to the OLC opinions, you are correct. They do represent a discussion and an analysis of legal issues on a wide variety of subjects. When a variety of agencies come to the department for that independent advice that we must provide them. Certainly, I'm not aware of the discussions that have been had about this previous opinion in terms of providing it. Certainly, I will commit to you to work with this committee as well as the Intelligence Committee to find a way to provide the information that you need consistent with the department's own law enforcement and investigative priorities.
Thank you very much. This particular opinion is important, and it would be useful if we can review it. So thank you. On state secrets, on September 23rd, 2009, the Attorney General issued a memorandum establishing new procedures and standards to govern DOJ's defense of an assertion of the state secrets privilege in litigation. Among other things, the memorandum stated that the DOJ would provide the periodic reports to Congress on the exercise of these state secrets privilege. Since 2009, only one such report from April 2011 has been provided. That report discussed the two cases in which the privilege had been invoked under the new policy, but those are no longer the only two cases. So I'd like to ask you if you could provide the appropriate oversight committees with the second periodic report on the exercise of state secret privileges that discusses those cases which the privilege has been invoked on since April of 2011.
Senator, you raised the important issue of the need to work with the oversight committees, be they this committee or Intelligence, in reviewing the actions of the Department of Justice, not just so that committees can carry out their work, but so that the American people can be aware of how the department carries out its work. I'm not familiar with the reports that you referred at this point. I certainly look forward to reviewing this issue, and I certainly commit to you that I will do my best to ensure that the department lives up to its obligations that it has set forth.
Good, and I will come back. This is an important question to us, so I will come back and hopefully can get this, get an answer, yes or no, within the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much.
Senator, I look forward to learning more about the issue, and I look forward to sharing that with you should I be confirmed, as well as any issues of concern that this committee or others have.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Feinstein. Now it's Senator Sessions' turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is great to have you here. I appreciated the opportunity to have a good discussion, I think, in our office, and having had, I think I just passed my time in the Senate longer than I spent in the Department of Justice. And it was a great honor to serve that, and I have high ideals for this department. And we understand that the Attorney General is the premier law enforcement officer, the senior law enforcement officer in America. He or she sets the tone for law in America, the commitment to law, and must resist politicizing law and do the right thing on a daily basis. And on occasion, you're called upon to issue opinions. OLC works for you, the Office of Legal Counsel, who issues these opinions, and you'll have to tell the President yes or no on something that he may want to do. Are you able and willing to tell the President of the United States no if he asks to permission or a legal opinion that supports an action you believe is wrong?
Senator, I believe you have touched upon one of the most important responsibilities of the Attorney General. And let me say also that I appreciated very much the opportunity to meet with you and discuss these important issues. The Attorney General's position as a Cabinet member is perhaps unique from all of the Cabinet members. Yes, a member of the President's Cabinet, but the Attorney General has a unique responsibility to provide independent and objective advice to the President or any agency when it is sought, and sometimes perhaps even when it is not sought. With respect to the Office of Legal Counsel...
And just so you understand that your role is such that on occasion you have to say no to the person who actually appointed you to the job and who you support?
Senator, I do understand that that is, in fact, the role and the responsibility of the Attorney General, and, in fact, a necessary obligation on their part.
Well, you know, people have agendas, and attorneys general sometimes do, and they have to guard against that and be objective, as you basically said to me now in committee. On April 24th of 2013, Attorney General Holder said this, and I'm raising this fundamentally because I think there's a lot of confusion about how we should think about immigration in America, what our duties and what our responsibilities are. He said this, quote, "Creating a pathway to earn citizenship for the 11 million unauthorized immigrants in our country is essential. The way we treat our friends and neighbors who are undocumented by creating a mechanism for them to earn citizenship and move out of the shadows transcends the issue of immigration status. This is a matter of civil and human rights." So let me ask you, do you believe that a person who enters the country unlawfully, that is perhaps used false documents or otherwise entered here, has a civil right to citizenship?
Well, Senator, I'm not familiar with the context of those comments. I certainly think that you do touch upon the difficult issue of how do we handle the undocumented immigrants who come to our country, I believe, for the life that we offer. I believe because of the values that we espouse.
I don't want to interrupt you, but just the question is, do you agree with that statement? That it's a matter of civil rights and citizenship and work authority, right to work in America for someone who enters the country unlawfully. That's a civil right?
Senator, I haven't studied the issue enough to come to a legal conclusion on that. I certainly think that people who come to this country in a variety of ways can rehabilitate themselves and apply, but that would have to be something that would be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Well, I'd just like to hear you answer that. Is there a civil right for a person who enters the country unlawfully, who would like to work and like to be a citizen, to demand that contrary to the laws of the United States? And when Congress doesn't pass it, is that a right that they are entitled to demand?
So I think that citizenship is a privilege. Certainly it's a right for those of us born here. I think it's a privilege that has to be earned. And within the panoply of civil rights that are recognized by our jurisprudence now, I don't see one that you are describing. I
certainly agree. I'm a little surprised it took you that long, but the Attorney General statement was breathtaking to me. Now, Peter Kirsten, who's a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, responded to that some time ago, and here's what he said. Quote, "To equate amnesty for breaking the nation's immigration laws with civil rights betrays an incoherent and ahistorical understanding of the civil rights movement. Law-abiding black citizens of the United States were not seeking exemption from law. They were seeking application of such laws in the same manner that was applied to whites." Close quote. Would you agree with Mr. Kirstenau's analysis?
Well, certainly I think with respect to the civil rights movement and the role of African Americans in it, it certainly was a movement designed to assure equal access to law and equal application of law.
Well, on the 50th anniversary of the Selma March, it's approaching, people were denied systematically fundamental rights as citizens of the United States of America. And that was a historic event. It changed America, and I think it's important that that be remembered. But I will just tell you, it's quite different, as I think Mr. Kirsten now points out, to demand your lawful rights as an American and to ask for, insist that civil rights apply to those who enter the country unlawfully to have these benefits. Well, the president's action would give people who came here unlawfully the right to work, the right to participate in Social Security and Medicare. When Congress has not done that, allows them to stay for at least a period lawfully. Let me ask you this. In the workplace of America today, when we have a high number of unemployed, we've had declining wages for many years, we have the lowest percentage of Americans working, who has more right to a job in this country? A lawful immigrant who's here, a green card holder, or a citizen, or a person who entered the country unlawfully?
Well, Senator, I believe that the right and the obligation to work is one that's shared by everyone in this country, regardless of how they came here. And certainly if someone is here, regardless of status, I would prefer that they be participating in the workplace than not participating in the workplace. With respect to...
Well, that was... so you think that a person that's, anybody that's here lawfully or unlawfully is entitled to work in America?
Well, Senator, I'm not sure if I know, if I understand the basis for your question as to whether or not there's a legal basis for them to work or not.
I ask you, we're talking about rights, who has the most rights? Mm-hmm. Does a lawful American immigrant or citizen have the right to have the laws of the United States enforced so that they might be able to work? Or does a person who came here unlawfully have a right to demand a job?
Certainly the benefits of citizenship confer greater rights on those of us who are citizens and than those who are not.
Well, do you think a person that's here unlawfully is entitled to work in the United States when the law says that employers can't hire somebody unlawfully in America?
I believe that... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, sir. I think that certainly the provision that you refer to regarding to the role of the employer in ensuring the legal status of those who are here is an important one, and that we have to look at in conjunction with this issue in terms of preventing undocumented workers who, as you've indicated before, are seeking employment. Again, we want everyone to seek employment, but we have in place at this point in time a legal framework that requests or requires employers to both provide information about citizenship as well as not hire individuals without citizenship.
Do you think that someone given, I understand that you support the executive order and OLC's opinion, is that correct? I don't
believe my role at this point is to support or not support it. My review of it was to see whether or not it did outline a legal framework for some of the actions that were requested. And as noted, it indicated that there was not a legal framework for other actions that were requested.
Just let me wrap up by asking this. Are you, if a person comes here and is given a lawful right under the President's executive amnesty to have a Social Security and a work authorization card, what if somebody prefers to hire an American citizen first? Would you take action against them? Do you understand this to mean that those who are given executive amnesty are entitled as much as anybody else in America to compete for a job in America?
Well, I don't believe that it would give anyone any greater access to the workforce, and certainly an employer would be looking at the issues of citizenship and making those determinations.
Would you take action against an employer who says, no, I prefer to hire somebody that came to the country lawfully rather than someone given executive amnesty by the President? Would the Department of Justice take action against them?
When you answer that, I'll move on then.
Thank you, sir. With respect to the provision about temporary deferral, I did not read it as providing a legal amnesty, that is that permanent status there, but a temporary deferral. With respect to whether or not those individuals would be able to seek redress for employment discrimination, if that is the purpose of your question. Again, I haven't studied that legal issue. I certainly think you raise an important point and would look forward to discussing it with you and using and relying upon your thoughts and experience as we consider that point.
Thank you, Senator Sessions. Now, Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you. And, you know, I think that even in the short while here, it's clear to my colleagues why you are such a tremendous, why you've been such a tremendous U.S. attorney in my home state of New York and home borough of Brooklyn, and why you'd make such a great attorney general. You've just, you know, you're just knocking them out of the park. And speaking of sports analogies, there's another point I'd like my colleagues to know, another testament to your perseverance, to your loyalty in the face of incredible adversity. With all due respect to Mr. Tillis, you're not a Tar Heel or a Blue Devil, you're a Knicks fan. It's a lot tougher being a Knicks fan than going through these questions here today. But anyway, I'd like to just go over a couple of points some of my colleagues made. First, on prosecutorial discretion. There's a myth out there that prosecutorial discretion policies are tantamount to an illegal failure to force the law. And we know that you have enforced the law aggressively and will continue to do so, as has the administration. Some of my friends across the aisle seem to be suggesting that the President's announcement of the enforcement policies for the Department of Homeland Security is tantamount to an announcement that we won't enforce our immigration laws, but that's absurd. We know we have 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. Congress, this body, only allocates enough money for DHS to deport 400,000 of them. 11 million illegal immigrants, enough money to deport 400,000. Obviously, you have to make some choices here. And I'm sure when my dear friend Jeff Sessions, and he is a dear friend, was U.S. Attorney in Alabama, he used prosecutorial discretion. I know he did a good job going after violent drug dealers and criminals. We want our prosecutors to go after the highest level crimes if they don't have the resources to do all of them. Doesn't it make sense to have a general rule to prosecute in a prosecutorial office with limited resources to go after bank robbers before you go after shoplifters? Now, obviously, there can be an occasional exception. As you mentioned, the President's executive order allows for that occasional exception. But this idea that having an office go after the higher level, more dangerous crimes first is part of how law enforcement has gone on for hundreds of years, and it should. So I don't even get this idea that this is an illegal act by the President. We arm our law enforcement officials with an array of laws but limited resources. They have to make hard choices. And a straightforward allocation of resources is not political activism. It's what prosecutors are doing in every jurisdiction of this land right now. Immigration is like any other issue. We have limited resources. It makes eminent sense to go after the hardened criminals before going after lower-level offenders. So just let me ask you a couple of questions here. Don't U.S. attorney offices all over the country consistently have to make these general type of prosecutorial decisions on a day-to-day basis? And how do you?
Yes, Senator. With respect to the exercise of discretion and the setting of priorities, one of the privileges that I have had of being the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York and working with my colleagues across the country has been getting to know them and learning about how different every district is, how a crime problem in Brooklyn may not even appear on the West Coast, and how a crime problem in the Midwest that has seen an increase in crime due to the happy accident of increased oil reserves may present issues that I would never face in an urban environment. My colleagues and I work together, and we share our thoughts on the best ways to deploy our limited resources to deal with the crime problems in our districts. My colleagues that have a large number of Native American reservations in their districts, for example, have a very different base of problems than I do, but they are just as committed and just as focused on keeping those citizens safe as well. So all of us look at the crime problems in our districts. To do that, we work very closely with our law enforcement partners in looking at how they have determined the nature of the threat, be it terrorism, be it narcotics, be it those who would target children. We also work closely with our state and local counterparts, not just the law enforcement counterparts, but our prosecutive counterparts in the district attorney's offices. Many times I will have a matter in my office that is subject to both federal and state jurisdiction, and it may be more appropriate for the district attorney to prosecute that type of crime because of the nature of the sentence that can be achieved, because of the impact on a particular victim or community, or because of a legal issue involving proof and the admissibility thereof. All of these things go into the consideration of how we manage individual cases, but also how we set priorities and then deploy our limited resources to best protect the people of our district.
Exactly. Every prosecutor, whether it's the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office, sets priorities and has to. And that's just what the President did, in my opinion, in the executive order. Next one, we're hearing a lot about executive action being unconstitutional. And so I'd like to just talk about that. That's another myth that's out there. Now, no federal court has struck down executive action. The most recent federal court to hand down a decision supported it. I've heard it suggested federal courts have declared executive action unconstitutional. It so happens, in fact, dating back to Chief Justice Rehnquist, the Supreme Court has repeatedly bolstered executive discretion and refused to review agency decisions that are within the law. With respect to this executive action, there have been 2 federal cases filed. One here in Washington by Sheriff Arpaio, notoriously anti-immigration activist. That's been dismissed. The second suit was filed in Texas and is still pending. Now we're hearing that, so no courts have struck down executive action. Now we're hearing that Speaker Boehner and House Republicans will be suing the President on this executive action. I don't think that's a responsible use of taxpayer dollars, but at least Speaker Boehner and I agree on one thing. If Republicans disagree with President Obama over the legality of this policy, they can sue him and let the courts decide. The confirmation of America's highest law enforcement officer is not the time or place to vent frustration. So, let me just ask you a couple of questions. You've answered them, but I want to underscore them because some people are concerned that the, quote, rogue Obama administration is lawless. Will you commit to following court decisions and legal process?
Absolutely, Senator. That's my first point of reference.
And specifically, if a court happens to strike down executive action, will you respect that court decision?
I will respect that court decision.
And let's imagine Congress. I don't think this will happen. I would try to prevent it as best I could. But let's say Congress were to pass a bill explicitly prohibiting President Obama's immigration actions, a bill I find hard to imagine the President would sign. But let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, happened. If such a bill passed, will you commit to following the new law?
I will commit to following all the laws duly executed by this body.
Thank you. Okay, just one other issue, since I have a little more time. Work permits, which my good friend, again, Senator Sessions brought up. Some have suggested it's illegal for the administration to issue work permits for recipients of deferred action. Again, they imply this is unprecedented. That's misleading. Guess who did it in 1982? Ronald Reagan. They published INS regulations authorizing work permits for recipients of deferred action. 1982, the Reagan administration. That's not to say workplace enforcement isn't necessary. It is. And in fact, isn't it true, Ms. Lynch, that you have a strong record of enforcing workplace immigration rules? Just tell us a little about the 7-Eleven stores case that you brought on Long Island.
Thank you, Senator. The case against the 7-Eleven stores and various franchises was a very important one to my office because it was one in which we saw a corporate entity deliberately flouting the labor laws. Individuals, mostly of a particular ethnic group, who owned franchises at 7-Eleven were reaching out to their own community members and hiring them to work in the stores. This would have been an opportunity for individuals to earn money for their families and to essentially become part of the American dream. Instead, however, the workers were systematically victimized. They were forced to work double shifts, triple shifts, yet only paid for working part-time hours. They were only given their money in either a 7-Eleven debit card or cash as deemed appropriate by the manager. Even worse than this was the evidence that we uncovered that the stores were aware that they were violating the labor laws and simply flouting them. They also requested, or they also required the workers to all live together in company-sanctioned housing. We essentially were creating a modern-day plantation system on Long Island and also throughout the Virginia area with co-conspirators of these franchise owners. We spent a long time working on the investigation in conjunction with our law enforcement partners. The matter is still being reviewed with respect to other states, and wherever we find workers being victimized and being discriminated against, certainly my office has never hesitated to take action.
Thank you. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would offer for the record a consent that an article from the Atlantic saying, headline by David Frum, Reagan and Bush offer no precedent for Obama's amnesty order, and I think that's crystal clear. Senator Cornyn, Justice Cornyn is next.
Good morning, Ms.
Good
Lynch.
morning.
Congratulations again to you on your nomination, and thank you for coming to my office I guess it was last Friday.
Yes.
To visit about this hearing, and I should say congratulations to you for an outstanding career as a United States Attorney. The challenge I think that people have when they come to Washington, D.C. and they assume jobs that have political implications is that they sort of forget their basic mooring in the law and they become politicians masquerading as law enforcement officers, and that's a real challenge. And I won't claim that it's only a challenge for Democrats. It's a challenge, has been a challenge for Republicans as well. But I am concerned. Well, let me, for Senator Schumer's benefit, let me just stipulate: you're not Eric Holder, are you?
No, I'm not, sir.
So no one's suggesting that you are, but of course, Attorney General Holder's record is heavy on our minds now, and I agree with the chairman about his concerns when the Attorney General refers to himself as the President's wingman, suggesting that he does not exercise independent legal judgment as the chief law enforcement officer for the country. You wouldn't consider yourself to be a political arm of the White House as Attorney General, would you?
No, Senator, that would be a totally inappropriate view of the position of Attorney General, which
you'd be willing to tell your friends no, if in your judgment the law required that.
Sir, I think that I have to be willing to tell not just my friends and acquaintances, but colleagues no, if the law requires it.
And that would be include the President of the United States.
I think that the obligation of the Attorney General is to, when presented with matters by the President, to provide a full, thorough, independent, substantive legal analysis and give the President the best independent judgment that there is. And that may be a judgment that says that there is a legal framework for certain actions, and it may be a judgment that says that there is not a legal framework for certain actions.
And while we've stipulated you're not Eric Holder, Mr. Holder's record is certainly on our minds because I can't think of an Attorney General who so misevaluated the independent role of the chief law enforcement officer and taken on that aspect of the President's wingman and operated as a politician using the awesome power conferred by our laws on the Attorney General. The Attorney General has been openly contemptuous of the oversight responsibilities of a co-equal branch of government. He's stonewalled legitimate investigations by the Congress, including the investigation into the Fast and Furious episode that Senator Grassley referred to earlier, making bogus claims of executive privilege in order to keep Congress and the American people from finding out the facts. We know that the Attorney General has repeatedly made legal arguments that have been rejected as unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court. And he's harassed states like mine, and I suspect you'll hear from another colleague about his state, on matters like voter ID, when the United States Supreme Court has upheld the validity of voter ID as a means to protect the integrity of the ballot for people who are qualified to vote. And at the same time, the Attorney General has failed to implement laws that Congress has passed in order to provide, to protect the voting rights of our military deployed overseas. He's also politicized the war on terror. He's declassified top-secret legal memos exposing public officials in the intelligence community to not only ridicule but threats, legal and otherwise, for performing actions that they were told by the highest legal authorities were legal and were necessary to save American lives. And indeed, he reopened a criminal investigation into those same members of the intelligence community after a previous investigation had not revealed any basis for criminal charges. So how do we know you're not going to perform your duties of office as Attorney General the way Eric Holder has performed his duties? How are you going to be different?
Senator, if confirmed as Attorney General, I will be myself. I will be Loretta Lynch. And I would refer you to my record as United States Attorney on 2 occasions, as well as a practicing lawyer, to see the independence and that I've always brought to every particular matter. I certainly think that going forward, while I'm not familiar with the particulars of the issues that you raise, they clearly are of concern to you and perhaps to this committee. And I do pledge to this committee that I want to hear your concerns. I want to listen to your concerns, and I will always be open to discussing those issues with you. Senator, I'm sure that as we go forward, should I be confirmed, while it would be wonderful to think that you would agree with everything that I would do, that may not be the case.
You may not agree with everything we do.
And that is perfectly appropriate. But, Senator, I will always be open to discussing with you why I have done something and the basis for which I have made an action to the extent that I am able to do so. I have found that to be the most effective way of, not just for me, in terms of learning from people with whom I disagree, but also working effectively with people with whom I may disagree on various points, but with whom, like you, we share a common goal.
Ms. Lynch, I've been married 35 years, and I can guarantee you that 100% agreement is an impossible standard for anybody to comply with. So we don't expect that, obviously. But I want to ask you about your commitment to working with the committee and Congress and respecting our congressional oversight authority. Senator, a recent letter sent to Senator Leahy on behalf of Attorney General Holder was dated December the 5th, 2014, and it responds to questions for the record that arose in an appearance before this committee on March the 6th, 2013. So obviously this looks roughly a year and a half, more than a year and a half later. Can we expect a more timely response from you and the Department of Justice to the legitimate inquiries of this committee?
Certainly, Senator. I believe that the oversight responsibility of this committee is important, not just for the functioning of the committee, but also to the American people in terms of helping them understand the way in which the department operates and the way in which we all work to keep them safe. I commit to you absolutely that I will work with this committee to ensure that we provide as timely a response as possible. I'm not sure of the particulars of the matter that you raised, so I'm not able to comment on that. But certainly I would hope to be able to provide you with the information that you need in as timely a manner as possible, consistent with the department's litigation and enforcement responsibilities.
I think it would make it possible for you to be a more effective Attorney General, and it would make it possible for us to be more effective in our respective roles as member of Congress, exercising our responsibilities as well. I want to just ask you a little bit about prosecutorial discretion, which you've heard something about here. My only regret from this morning's hearing is that Senator Schumer, the senior senator from New York who introduced you, he wasn't available for cross-examination by members of the committee, but we'll have a chance to talk later. But he was somewhat dismissive of concerns about this massive, what I would consider in essence refusal to enforce existing law that is involved in these executive actions. There is a difference, to your mind, isn't there, between a case-by-case exercise of prosecutorial discretion and a refusal to enforce the laws that are on the books? There is a difference, isn't there?
Senator, there is a difference, and I do not view the Department of Justice, certainly in my own practice, as refusing to enforce laws, but rather attempting to set priorities and then exercising discretion within those priorities.
Well, let me ask you about that. Isn't it incumbent upon the Department of Justice to ask Congress for the resources to do the job that Congress has said the department must perform before you can come back and say, well, we're just not going to pursue those crimes and those offenses because we don't have enough money? I mean, isn't it your responsibility? Won't it be your responsibility as the next Attorney General to come to us and ask us for those resources? I can't imagine if Attorney General Holder or the President of the United States or Secretary Johnson or others had come to us and said, we don't have the resources to enforce the immigration laws, so we're going to have to, in essence, decline to enforce them because we don't have those. I mean, don't you have that responsibility to ask for those resources before you decline to enforce the law based on lack of resources?
Certainly, Senator, I'm not aware of the Department of Homeland Security's budget request before this body or Congress in general. With respect to the Department of Justice, I have been involved in reviewing the budget as part of my work on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and certainly during sequestration spent a great deal of time looking at the budget to ensure that we did maintain the appropriate resources to carry out our core mission of protecting the American people within the constraints that were placed upon us at that time. And it's my understanding that with respect to budget requests that the Department of Justice makes, that those requests do include information about goals and priorities across the board as a way of explaining to Congress why specific resources are needed.
So you do need more money.
I would probably join all of my agencies in saying that, sir, but I can't speak for them.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Now Senator Durbin, and the next Republican will be Senator Lindsey Graham.
Ms. Lynch, thank you for being here. I will be objective, although I am deferential to women named Loretta. I've been married to one for 47 years, and I'm glad that you're here today. When your father lifted you up on his shoulders at that Greensboro church, you were a young girl at the time, but a witness to a moment in history that changed America forever and literally changed your life. There was no way you could know that. One of the central issues that was raised during the civil rights movement was the right to vote, a right which Chief Justice Roberts said, sitting in that very same place, in quoting a court decision, is preservative of all rights. We are now in a unique position, some 50 years later, about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder struck down major provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and Congress, which historically had renewed the Voting Rights Act on a bipartisan basis, is now, with few rare exceptions, split along partisan lines as to whether or not there will be a renewal of some sections. We are finding states across the nation, many states, that are changing the requirements for voting. I chaired the Constitution Subcommittee of Judiciary. I took the subcommittee to public hearings in Ohio and Florida, where there were new restrictions placed on voting by state legislatures. I called the election officials of both political parties in those states and asked them if there was any evidence of voter fraud or voter abuse that led to these legislative changes, and to a person they said virtually none. What has happened is that the Department of Justice has stepped in some cases that they considered to be extreme and unfair, and worked to stop the implementation of these state laws that restricted the right to vote. As you embark on the possibility of making that decision as Attorney General, how do you view the state of voting rights in America today, and what do you view as your responsibility should you be our next Attorney General?
Thank you, Senator. Certainly, I believe that the right to vote is the cornerstone of a free democracy, and one that every citizen has the right, and in fact, some would argue the obligation to exercise. With respect to how voting rights are being handled in the country now, I think we are in a time of great debate over these issues. Those are important issues, and I'm certainly open to hearing all sides of it. With respect to how, and I also think that every state does have the responsibility and obligation to regulate the voter rolls and to ensure that the vote is carried out freely and openly and fairly. And I do believe that that is the goal of many of our elected officials, if not most of our elected officials, who deal with these issues every day. The concerns that are raised, Senator, are when acts that are taken with a goal towards protecting and preserving the integrity of the vote act in a different way and act to suppress the vote or in some way prevent people from exercising the franchise. I would hope that at the first outset, through the political discourse and discussion, that we could have conversation about that and come to a resolution of practices and procedures that would ensure the right to vote for all citizens while still protecting the integrity of everyone's ballot. Absent that, I believe that when laws are passed, the Department of Justice has to look very carefully at their impact in making a decision as to how to proceed. Certainly, there have been instances when voter ID laws have received approval from the department under what was previously known as pre-clearance because they sought to simply regulate and protect the ballot as opposed to act in a different way. But where there is an indication that the vote will somehow be harmed, I believe the Department of Justice certainly has the obligation to review that matter, to look carefully at all of the facts and evidence, and then proceed accordingly.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I find it ironic and painful that at this moment in our history, as we celebrate with the movie Selma and talk about 50-year anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, that states, many states, on a systematic basis are making it more difficult for Americans to vote without any evidence of voter fraud to back up those changes. In one southern state, it's estimated that some 600,000 voters were basically precluded from voting in an election because of new voter ID requirements. In that same state, a 93-year-old veteran was turned away, a 70-year-old doctor turned away, people who were proud to vote, wanted to vote, turned away by new laws. These were people who had a right to vote, and it troubles me that amidst all the celebration of the civil rights movement, we are finding a reversal of the most fundamental principle in preserving that right to vote. I appreciate what you had to say about it. I would say a word about the Smarter Sentencing Act, which I introduced with Senator Lee, who may be still here today, from Utah, a bipartisan measure with 32 co-sponsors in an effort to take a look at the reality that not only does the United States have more prisoners per capita than any other nation, but in many instances, lengthy prison sentences do not serve the cause of justice and deny us resources we need to keep our communities safe. Attorney General Holder, who is not held in the highest regard by some members of this committee, has been an outspoken supporter of this bipartisan measure, and I hope that you would consider supporting it too, although I won't put you on the spot to do that without giving you a chance to look at it. Let me add one other element. As chairman of the Constitution and Human Rights and Civil Rights Committee, which was its name before this new Congress, we also had a hearing on solitary confinement. It turns out the United States, in its prison system, has more prisoners in solitary confinement than any other nation. And we had testimony from those who had spent 10 years on death row in solitary confinement in Texas, an even longer period of time in solitary confinement on death row in the state of Louisiana, and ultimately exonerated. They were not found to be guilty. The devastating impact that has on the human mind and spirit for so many of these people who serve time in solitary confinement, many of whom are going to be ultimately released, is something the Federal Bureau of Prisons is now addressing. You've been a prosecutor for many years. What is your view when it comes to incarceration and segregation or solitary confinement?
Senator, you raise important issues about the management of our prison system, which are charged with being the ultimate repository for those that we have concluded are seeking to harm Americans, but are also charged with doing so in a manner that is constitutional, that is effective, and that protects the safety of both the inmates and those who are guarding them. So these are balances that we have to strike. And I take the view that certainly as we look at these issues, one of the benefits, I believe, of discourse like this, and that I hope to have going forward with this committee, is continued discussion on those issues. There are a number of municipalities, for example, that are looking at this very same issue. New York City is looking at it with respect to juvenile detention and looking to remove solitary confinement as an option for juvenile detention as well, based on many of the similar studies that you are talking about. I believe we have to look at those studies. We have to listen to the evidence that comes before us and make the best determination about how to handle what can be a dangerous prison population, but how to handle that prison population in a way that's both constitutional and effective.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Graham is the next person. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Lynch, and congratulations on being chosen by the President. This is truly an honor, I'm sure. Do you support the death penalty?
Senator, I believe that the death penalty is an effective penalty. In fact, my office most recently was able to achieve a death verdict there.
Yes.
So we have sought it, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Well, that's good from my point of view. I don't know about other people. Sequestration. Have you had a chance to look at the impact sequestration will create on your ability to defend this nation as Attorney General, all those who work for you?
Senator, with respect to sequestration, I have had an opportunity to review that matter very closely through my work on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and also as United States Attorney, dealing with the budgetary limits that came down with the implementation of sequestration. As you are familiar with the history, perhaps far more than I, it did constrain the federal budget greatly about 18 months ago.
Is this a fair statement? If Congress continues to implement sequestration, it will devastate the Department of Justice's ability to effectively defend this country?
Senator, I believe that that is not only a fair statement, but it is one that warrants serious discussion about how we manage budgets in a responsible manner, which I know is important to this body, but also giving us the tools that we need to protect the American people.
In your time in this business, have you ever seen more threats to our country than are presented today?
Certainly throughout my career as a prosecutor and U.S. Attorney, we are seeing an increased number and probably the highest number of threats that I have seen, not just from terrorist activity, but the increased activity in terms of cyber crime is one that is not only increased numerically, but qualitatively in the type of threat that we face.
So we need to up our game in the cybersecurity area fairly quickly. Do you agree with that?
We do need to make sure we have the resources we need to keep up with cyber crimes and also to get ahead of these criminals in terms of detection, in terms of prevention, even before we get to the apprehension of these criminals.
And there's just not criminals. Terrorists also are in the cyber business. Is that correct?
Senator, you've outlined perhaps the greatest fear of any prosecutor, is that the combination of a cyber attack being carried out on behalf of a terrorist entity is one that we take great pains to prevent, to detect, and to disrupt. But it is certainly an emerging threat and calls for resources beyond just mere personnel, but in terms of our own technology also.
Does it also cry out for Congress to take a comprehensive approach to our cyber problems and pass legislation that would modernize our ability to deal with this threat?
Certainly a comprehensive approach is necessary. In my experience, both in the Eastern District of New York and in talking to my colleagues, all of us are struck by the prevalence of cyber issues in every type of case that we prosecute now, much more so than even 5 or 10 years ago. And so we must have not only a comprehensive approach, but one that allows government to work with private industry as well to come up with ways to best protect us against this threat.
Could you give us an estimate, if not now, in the future, what it would cost to deport 11 million people?
Certainly, Senator, I wouldn't be able to give you that estimate now. And would probably have to reach out to the Department of Homeland Security, who would be charged with that particular action, to see if they could provide that information to you.
Okay. Do you have a role in the deportation of people here illegally in the Department of Justice? Do you have any role at all there?
Well, that role is initially, in terms of deportation, the role is initially handled by the Department of Homeland Security. There are the immigration courts through which individuals can seek either asylum or redress from deportation orders that are handled by the Department of Justice. But that would be simply actually further along in the process.
But that's part of the process.
Yes, it is.
If you could maybe give us an estimate of what it would take to deport 11 million people from your lane, call the Department of Justice and see what they say, I think it'd be instructive to us to see what the bill actually would be. Now, do you think the national NSA terrorist surveillance program is constitutional as it is today?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the NSA program, terrorist surveillance program that we have in effect today is constitutional?
Senator, I believe that it's not only it's constitutional and effective. I know that there are court challenges to it, and certainly we will abide by those court regulations.
Right.
But it has been a very effective tool in managing.
But you're okay with it being constitutional from your viewpoint?
Certainly constitutional and effective.
Thank you. Marijuana. There are a lot of states legalizing marijuana for personal consumption. Is it a crime at the federal level to possess marijuana?
Marijuana is still a criminal substance under federal law, and it is still a crime not only to possess but to distribute under federal law.
Under the doctrine of preemption, would the federal law preempt states who are trying to legalize the substance?
Senator, I think you raised very important questions about the relation of the federal criminal system with the states and their ability to regulate criminal law that they also have, because as there is concurrent jurisdiction, and in terms of matters in which citizens of various states have voted. With respect to the marijuana enforcement laws, it is still the policy of the administration, and certainly would be my policy, if confirmed as Attorney General, to continue enforcing the marijuana laws, particularly with respect to the money laundering aspect of it, where we see the evidence that marijuana, as I've noticed in cases in my own district, brings with it not only organized crime activity, but great levels of violence.
Do you know of Michelle Leonhardt, the DEA administrator? I don't know if I said her name right.
She is the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Have you ever had a discussion with her about her views of legalizing marijuana?
Michelle and I have not had that discussion, although we have spoken on any number of other
Could
issues.
you maybe have that discussion and report back to me as to what the results were?
Certainly, Senator. I look forward to speaking to not just Ms. Leonard, but with you on this issue.
In August 29, 2013, I think Deputy Attorney General James M. Cole advised all U.S. attorneys that enforcing marijuana laws against those that are in compliance with state marijuana laws would not be a priority of the DOJ. Did you get that memo?
All U.S. attorneys received that memo, as did I.
Do you think that is a good policy?
I believe that the Deputy Attorney General's policy seeks to try and work with state systems that have chosen to take, admittedly, a different approach from the federal government with respect to marijuana, and determine the most effective way to still pursue marijuana cases consistent with the states and the choices that they have made. The Deputy Attorney General's policy, as I understood it and has been implemented, still requires federal prosecutors to seek prosecution of marijuana cases, particularly where we have situations where children are at risk, where marijuana is crossing state lines, particularly where you have marijuana being trafficked from a state that has chosen a legal framework into a state that has not chosen a legal framework, and the attendant harms therein, as well as those who are driving under the influence of this. A great concern, certainly within the department and those of us who are looking at these issues, is the availability of the edible products and the risk of those falling into the hands of children and causing great harm there.
If a state is intending to try to legalize personal consumption at a small level of marijuana, what would your advice be to that state?
Well, certainly I'm not sure that if a state were to reach out to the department for its views, and I don't know if that's happened or what advice has been given, but certainly I believe the department would have an obligation to inform them of the current federal status of narcotics laws and the department's position that the federal narcotics laws will still be enforced by the Department of Justice.
In 2006, you signed an amicus brief supporting Planned Parenthood's opposition to partial birth abortion ban. Is that correct?
Yes, I was one of a number of former Department of Justice officials, although the amicus brief that we signed was focused on the issue of the facial issues of the law and how it might impact the perception of law enforcement's discretion and independence.
Okay. The only reason I mention that is that if there's a Republican president in the future and an Attorney General nominee takes an opposite view on an issue like abortion, I hope our friends on the other side will acknowledge it's okay to be an advocate for a cause as a lawyer. That doesn't disqualify you from serving. Same-sex marriage, the courts are wrestling with this issue right now.
Sorry.
Same-sex marriage, this may go to the Supreme Court very soon. If the Supreme Court rules that same-sex marriage bans are unconstitutional, it violates the U.S. Constitution for a state to try to limit marriage between a man and a woman. That's clearly the law of the land unless there's a constitutional amendment to change it. What legal rationale would be in play that would prohibit polygamy? What's the legal difference between a state, a ban on same-sex marriage being unconstitutional, but a ban on polygamy being constitutional? Could you try to articulate how one could be banned under the Constitution and the other not?
Well, Senator, I have not been involved in the argument or analysis of the cases that have gone before the Supreme Court. So, and I'm not comfortable undertaking legal analysis without having had the ability to undertake a review of the relevant facts and the precedent there. So I certainly would not be able to provide you with that analysis at this point in time, but I look forward to continuing the discussions with you.
Before the senator from Rhode Island asks his questions, this would be my plan, and you tell me if this will give you enough time. The Rhode Island Senator, Senator Lee, and then Senator Klobuchar, that'll take us till about 12:45. Then I was thinking of coming back about 1:30. Is that
Thank you, Senator.
Is that going to give you enough time?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Senator.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Lynch, welcome to the committee and congratulations on your nomination. I look forward to working with you on a considerable number of issues as we go forward. Since there has been a significant amount of commentary about the President's immigration measures, the ranking member has asked me to put into the record letters from law enforcement leaders in Ohio, Utah, Iowa, Indiana, and Wisconsin supporting the President's policies and saying, concluding, while the executive reforms improve a broken immigration system, they can achieve only a fraction of what can be accomplished by broad congressional action. We continue to recognize that what our broken system truly needs is a permanent legislative solution and urge Congress to enact comprehensive immigration reform legislation. There is a similar letter from the member organizations of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, and a similar statement for the record of Stan Marek of Texas, the president and CEO of the Marek family of companies. If I'm asked unanimous consent that those be made a part of the record. Without objection. There's also been considerable commentary about Attorney General Holder in a hearing at which he does not have the opportunity to defend himself. And it's my view that a significant amount of that commentary would not withstand his ability to defend himself if he were here. So let me say in response to that, there are legal arguments and policies that fall outside a particular political ideology. That does not make them outside the mainstream, and it does not politicize a department to make those arguments or pursue those policies. I'd argue, actually, that it's the effort to constrain the department within that ideology that would be politicizing. I'd further note, as a former United States attorney, that the department that Attorney General Holder inherited was in a very grave state of disarray. And that's not just a matter of opinion. The Office of Legal Counsel wrote opinions that were so bad so ill-informed, so ill-cited to the case law that pertained, that when they were finally exposed to peer review, they were widely ridiculed and ultimately withdrawn by the previous administration. We witnessed efforts to manipulate United States attorneys, and I know that you are one, Ms. Lynch, that caused a very public rebellion among sitting U.S. attorneys at the time, and that drew in past U.S. attorneys appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents. We were exposed to hiring practices within the department that were on their face overtly political and had political litmus tests for hiring, a first in the department's history, never gone down that way before, and ultimately a series of other issues as well as those led to the resignation of the Attorney General of the United States. So it's easy to critique Attorney General Holder and blame him for politicizing the department, but I think history's calm and dispassionate judgment will reflect that Attorney General actually brought the department back from a place where it had been sadly politicized. And I can say firsthand that a lot of my U.S. attorney colleagues, both from Republican and Democratic administrations, were very, very concerned about what was happening to the department back then. So I shouldn't waste the time of this hearing on that, but with all the things that have been said about Attorney General Holder without him having the opportunity to defend and rebut, I wanted to say that. So some of the areas I think we need to work together, Ms. Lynch, when you're confirmed, which as I hope you will be. Senator Graham raised the issue of cybersecurity, and he has been an extraordinarily helpful and forward-leaning member of the Senate on protecting our country from the dangers of cyber attacks, whether it's ordinary criminal activity or the theft of intellectual property wholesale on behalf of Chinese industries, or the really dangerous threat of laying in the cyber sabotage traps that can be detonated later on in the event of a conflict. I'm concerned about the structure within the department for handling cybersecurity. At an investigative level, it's spread across primarily the FBI, secondarily Secret Service, and to a degree Homeland Security. Within the department, it falls under the rubric both of the Criminal Division and of the National Security Division. And I hope that with the assistance of the Office of Management and Budget, you and I and the Office of Management and Budget and other interested senators can continue a conversation about what the deployment of resources and structure should look like against the cybersecurity threat in the future. Will you agree to participate in such a process?
Certainly, Senator. I think you've outlined an important issue. And if confirmed as Attorney General, I look forward to working with you and all of the relevant partners on this committee and throughout Congress in making sure that the department is best situated to handle this growing threat.
There is considerable bipartisan legislation in the Senate on this subject, and I hope it's one where we can get something serious accomplished in the months ahead. Another area where there is considerable bipartisan legislation is on sentencing reform. Senator Durbin mentioned his and Senator Lee's legislation that is at the front end, at the sentencing end. Senator Cornyn and I have a almost parallel bill that relates to the end of the sentence and how to encourage incarcerated people to get the type of job training, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, anger management, mental health care, family reconciliation, job training, whatever it is that they need, so that when they're put back into society, they have a less chance of going back to a life of crime, of recidivating, as they say. I think we've made a lot of progress on that, and I think we have very good legislation, and I hope that you and the department will continue to be supportive of our efforts.
Certainly, Senator, you've raised, I think, the next challenge as we look at how to manage our prison population and the issue of crime, which is how do we help people who are going to be released return to the communities from which they came and become productive citizens, as opposed to returning to the prior behavior, criminal behavior, that not only landed them in prison, but creates new victims. And that will certainly be an important part of my focus. Within the Eastern District of New York, we are very strong participants in reentry programs that are sponsored by our colleagues at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office in one of the most difficult neighborhoods in my district, in Brownsville. We work extensively with those reentry efforts, and those reentry efforts work exactly as you said, in focusing on job training and focusing on building skills so that those coming out of prisons can become productive members of society as opposed to those who will continue to harm others in society. So you certainly have raised very important issues, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with you and people on this committee and throughout this body on those issues.
Thank you. Another piece of legislation we'll be working on, thanks to the courtesy and care of our chairman, Senator Grassley, is a reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which has been now 12 years since its last reauthorization. And I appreciate very much that the chairman has been willing to work on this and has made it one of the priorities for this committee. Obviously, the way in which juveniles are treated in our correction system and as they're detained has been an important issue for the Justice Department, and I would ask again for your cooperation and active support of our process going forward to reauthorize the JJDPA.
Certainly, Senator, I think that the way in which we handle juveniles within the criminal justice system is something that is of great concern to me in terms of both my practice in the Eastern District of New York and also talking to my colleagues, the other U.S. attorneys across the country who face these issues. I believe it certainly is incumbent upon all of us to look at the latest research on issues of how juveniles develop and how they manage themselves in certain environments, and always be open to reviewing those. I look forward to working with you and others in discussing that statute.
In my last seconds, you and I have both had the experience of being United States attorneys, and I suspect we both had the experience of finding people who were targets of our criminal enforcement efforts who, if we look back into their past, might have avoided our attention had they managed their drug or alcohol addiction,
certainly,
or gotten the mental health treatment that they needed. And it's sort of I guess it's a societal sorrow when somebody like that doesn't get the treatment that they need and ends up in the criminal justice system, and it's a great burden for the taxpayer. We have other legislation, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, that I hope you will also work with us on to try to make sure that where we can intervene with appropriate addiction treatment and mental health treatment, we can move people to a more appropriate setting rather than burden the criminal justice system with what is often an inappropriate response to their conduct and to their condition.
Certainly, Senator, in my own district, our court has been very forward-thinking and very effective in setting up diversion programs and a pretrial opportunity program that has provided great support for people and enabled them to provide treatment and learn to become productive members of society and therefore escape being trapped into a spiral of criminal behavior and the results thereof.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Lynch, for joining us today. Thanks for your service to our country. I also appreciated our visit recently when you came to my office, and I'm grateful to you for your support for sentencing reform. The bipartisan legislation that I'm working on with Senator Durbin that he referenced a few minutes ago is important, and I appreciate your views on that as well. I want to speak with you briefly going back to prosecutorial discretion. As a former prosecutor, I assume you'd agree with me that there are limits to prosecutorial discretion, in the sense, at least, that it's intended to be an exception to the rule and not to swallow the rule itself. Would you agree with me that far?
Certainly, sir. I believe that in every instance, every prosecutor has to make the best determination of the problems presented in their own area, in my case, in my district, and set priorities, and within those priorities, exercise discretion.
Right. And so prosecutors inevitably have limited resources, and so it's understandable why they would choose, when they've got to prioritize, to perhaps put more resources into punishing, for example, bank robberies than they do into punishing pickpocketers. And perhaps they might put more resources into going after pickpocketers than they do going after people who exceed the speed limit. But at some point, there are limits to this, and that doesn't mean that it would be okay, that it would be a proper exercise of prosecutorial discretion to issue permits for people to speed, right?
Certainly, sir. I think that if a prosecutor were to come to the view that they had to prioritize one crime over another, you would always still want to retain the ability, even if there was an area that was not an immediate priority, if, for example, it became one because a particular neighborhood was being victimized, or, again, to use your issue of speeding, there were deaths resulting from that, you would want to have the ability to still, if you could, take resources and focus on that issue. It might not be the first priority, but you would want to have the ability to go back and deal with that issue.
And for that reason, prosecutorial authorities or law enforcement authorities typically don't go out and say, we're only going to punish you for a civil violation involving a traffic offense if you speed and then it results in an accident with injuries. They leave open the very real possibility, indeed the likelihood, that someone can and will be brought to justice in one way or another for any civil violation they commit while speeding.
Well, certainly I can't speak to all law enforcement agencies. I know that depending upon the agency, sometimes the priorities are known, sometimes they're expressed. Every office has guidelines. Certainly the law enforcement agencies are aware of certain guidelines in terms of, for example, a dollar amount involving certain types of crimes.
If someone went out and said, I'm going to issue a permit to someone saying that they may speed, saying they may go up to 100 miles an hour without receiving a ticket, that would, unless that person were also in charge of making the law in that jurisdiction, that would be a usurpation of the system by which our laws are made. Would you agree with that?
Again, without knowing more about it, I'm not able to respond to the hypothetical. It certainly doesn't sound like something that a law enforcement officer would be engaged in. But again, without knowing more of the facts, that I'm not able to really respond to your hypothetical.
Okay, thank you. Let's shift gears for a minute. Do you agree that citizens and groups of citizens should not be targeted by government, should not be the recipients of adverse action by the government based on their exercise of their First Amendment rights?
Certainly, I think that the First Amendment is one of the cornerstones of a free society. And I believe that our jurisprudence has set forth great protections for individuals as well as groups in the exercise of their First Amendment rights to make sure that they are protected and not targeted. I also would say that certainly as a career prosecutor and U.S. attorney, there is really no place for bias or personal view in terms of how we approach the types of crimes that we pursue.
And presumably you'd say the same with respect to someone's exercise of their rights under the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the Sixth or the Seventh or the Eighth. Under any of those protections, somebody shouldn't be punished by government for exercising their rights under those provisions of the Constitution.
Certainly, I believe that there are safeguards in place to prevent that. I think we always certainly have to balance that with the possibility of an extreme situation in which we may have to move quickly, for example, to protect someone, or there's an imminent threat therein. But I believe that there are protections set up for that very purpose.
Second Amendment rights as well, presumably then, right?
I believe that certainly the Supreme Court has set forth clarity on this issue, and so therefore that regardless of the amendment, that certainly that is a protected right.
Are you aware that there's a program called Operation Choke Point within the Department of Justice, and that through this program, the Department of Justice and some other federal law enforcement agencies have on some occasions put financial pressure on legal businesses, including hardworking Americans who happen to be involved in the business of selling firearms and ammunition, by essentially telling banks not to do business with them?
I'm generally familiar with the name Operation Choke Point, and my understanding of it with respect to the Department of Justice current work. Again, I haven't been involved in either the the implementation or the creation of it. But my general understanding of it is that it looks to target financial institutions that are involved in perpetrating frauds upon consumers, and where there might be a financial institution that is facilitating, for example, consumer bank accounts being looted or consumers essentially losing their bank accounts, that's the target of that. Again, I'm not familiar enough with the specifics of it to know about the underlying businesses that the transaction might have originated from, but that's my understanding of the program.
Okay. I assume it's safe to assume that should you be confirmed, you'll work with me to make sure that legitimate law-abiding Americans aren't targeted for their exercise of their Second Amendment rights.
On that and any other issue of importance to you, Senator, I look forward to hearing your concerns and working with you on them.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to talk about civil forfeiture for a minute. Do you think it's fundamentally just and fair for the government to be able to seize property from a citizen without having to prove that the citizen was guilty of any crime and based solely on a showing that there was probable cause to believe that that property was in some way used in connection with a crime?
Senator, I believe that civil forfeiture, civil and criminal forfeiture, are very important tools of the Department of Justice, as well as our state and local counterparts through state laws, in essentially managing or taking care of the first order of business, which is to take the profit out of criminal activity. With respect to civil forfeiture, certainly as implemented by the Department, it is done pursuant to supervision by a court. It's done pursuant to court order, and I believe that the protections are there. What I will also, sorry.
What if you just asked the average person on the street whether they thought the government could or should be able to do that? Should the government be able to take your property absent of showing that you did anything wrong? Thereafter requiring you as a condition for getting your property back, whether it's a bank account that's been seized or frozen, whether it's a vehicle that's been seized, that you would have to go back and prove your innocence. So you're guilty, in essence, until proven innocent, at least guilty in the sense that your property's gone. You think your average citizen would be comfortable with that?
Well, I certainly can't speak in terms of what the average citizen would or would not be aware of there. I certainly understand that there has been a lot of discussion and concern over asset forfeiture as a program as expressed by a number of people.
And particularly at the state level, such that some states have adopted, in response to a pretty widespread citizen outcry, laws significantly restricting the use of civil forfeiture proceedings for that very reason. Which leads to why I raise this with you. It's my understanding that the Department of Justice has, in many instances, been used as a conduit through which law enforcement officials at the state and local level can circumvent state laws restricting the use of civil forfeiture within the state court system. In other words, where under the state court's state law established system, that kind of forfeiture is prohibited. People can go through the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice will take out a fee, maybe 20% of the value of the assets seized, and then those can be returned. It's a process known as adoption. Don't you think most Americans would find that concerning if the federal government is facilitating efforts to circumvent state laws that are designed to prohibit the very thing that they're doing?
I think that a number of people would have questions about how the Department of Justice manages its asset forfeiture program, and my understanding is that those questions have been raised about various aspects of it. My understanding is that the Department is undertaking a review of its asset forfeiture program, and certainly as U.S. Attorney, I'm aware of the fact that the adoption program that you have just described, which did raise significant concerns from a number of parties, has actually been discontinued by the Department. That's the guidance that we have recently received, with some exceptions for things like items of danger, explosives, and the like. But it is part of an ongoing review of the asset forfeiture program, and certainly should I be confirmed, I look forward to continuing that review. I would also say, Senator, that I look forward to continuing these discussions with you as you express concerns and interests on behalf of constituents or others as an important part of the Department being as transparent as possible in explaining how it operates. Asset forfeiture is a wonderful tool. We return money to victims, we take the profit out of crime, but as with everything that we do, we want to make sure that we're being as responsive as possible to the people that we are serving.
Thank you. I look forward to those additional discussions, and I see my time's expired. Thank you very much.
Klobuchar.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you so much to you. I understand I'm the only thing that stands between you and your lunch, and this entire room and their lunch. So we will have a good 10 minutes here. Your dad seemed to enjoy that, Ms. Lynch. I think everyone knows you have an impressive resume, and the one thing that has not been brought up was something I actually read this weekend in the profile about you. As I was thinking about this old saying we have in our household, that the obstacles on life's path are not just obstacles, they are the path. And no one represents that better than you, Loretta Lynch. When I read about the story of you scoring so well on a test in elementary school that they didn't believe that you'd taken that test, and then you took it again and scored even higher. The obstacles are the path. Or the time that you became the valedictorian of your class, and the school officials said that it would be too controversial if you were the only valedictorian. And so they added some other students to be valedictorian. I was thinking of all the senators in this building. We may have more than a few valedictorians, and I don't think that ever happened to them. So I thank you for your courage and your perseverance, and your parents' courage and perseverance that brought you to us today. I was going to start with a question. I know you touched on it with Senator Schumer. As you know, I'm a former prosecutor. My office, we had about 400 people. We worked really well with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Some of the U.S. attorneys you know that I worked with, Todd Jones, who's now the head of our Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and then also Tom Heffelfinger, who was the U.S. Attorney under Bush. Now we have a guy named Andy Lugar, who you're also aware of. And it's been very important, that relationship that we've had with local prosecutors and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit more about how you would view that as the Attorney General, in terms of how you would like your U.S. attorneys to work with the local prosecutors. You know, can be very inundated with a lot of cases, and sometimes we would view the U.S. Attorney's Office as getting the luxury to spend a lot of time on cases, while we would be handling literally tens of thousands of cases coming in our doors.
Well, thank you, Senator. You touch upon an important part of my practice. One of the benefits of being the U.S. Attorney, as you've noted, is getting to know the other prosecutors, not just my fellow U.S. attorneys, but also the numerous state and local prosecutors with whom we work so well. I am so privileged in Brooklyn to have a strong relationship with the district attorneys in my district, in all 5 counties, but also even outside of my district, into Manhattan, into the Bronx, and beyond. We talk often on issues affecting our community. We talk often on issues affecting the entire district. I was privileged to be able to share starting my prescription drug initiative with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and also work closely with district attorneys in Nassau and Suffolk County in handling the problem of prescription drug abuse, which has spiked, unfortunately, and led to violence and, in fact, deaths.
And I think you know that the stats lately are that 4 out of 5 of heroin users started with prescription drugs, and then they turned to heroin. I think people are shocked by that, but you see that connection with the heroin as well.
We do indeed, because of the opioid substance of both drugs. And we are, in fact, seeing a resurgence in heroin, not just in my district, but unfortunately across the country. This problem, like so many others, is one that must be dealt with in a cooperative and collaborative manner. And I am incredibly proud to say that all of my United States attorneys' colleagues take very seriously the opportunity and the privilege to work with our state and local counterparts in crafting prescription drug initiatives, heroin initiatives, along with our violent crime initiatives. We work closely with our state and local counterparts to determine where is the best place for a case to be brought. We look at things like the type of sentence that can be achieved or the type of evidence that is admissible in the different proceedings. And we cannot have those discussions without building on a positive working relationship. And it has really been a hallmark of this U.S. attorney community. Should I be confirmed as Attorney General, I intend to draw upon that strength of my U.S. attorney colleagues, as well as all of my state and local counterparts throughout the country. People who are at the ground zero of these problems often come up with the best solutions. They pull in the healthcare community. They pull in parents. They pull in community leaders, and they come up with a solution that works, that can often be replicated in other places. I've seen that happen with my U.S. Attorney colleagues, particularly in the area of heroin abuse. And some of the initiatives that they are working on as well. So if confirmed as Attorney General, I intend to rely very heavily on my prosecutorial colleagues.
Well, thank you very much for that answer. And at some point, I think we talked about this before, but Senator Cornyn and I did the drug take-back bill, and we finally gotten the rules out from DEA on that, and we would look forward to working with you on that. Something else, I think I'll talk to you later about your work in Rwanda, but the fact that you've done some very important international work as well, but you've also done prosecution of international terrorists here at home. And what lessons have you taken from those cases? I'll tell you why this is important from home state perspective. As you know, we have our U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota indicted and successfully prosecuted a number of al-Shabaab members who had gone over to Somalia. We also had the first person killed in Syria fighting with ISIS was actually a Minnesotan. And our U.S. Attorney recently issued some indictments against others that have been recruited to fight over in Syria. There's a pilot program that the Justice Department has involving 3 cities, L.A., Boston, and Minneapolis-St. Paul. There's going to be an extremism conference coming up, but could you, one, talk about your experience with these kind of cases, and two, how you think that this pilot program should be funded? We're concerned because it's coming out of general funds, and if you would support some kind of specific funding for the program. Thank you.
Certainly, just talking initially on the subject of combating violent extremism, one of the most difficult things to see are young men and increasingly young women, many of them American citizens, who are turning to this radical brand of terror and being recruited to go overseas and become trained and are being sent back to perpetrate threats against the homeland. And the sources of this and the reasons for this are debated endlessly, and I think we need further discussion about that. But we must take steps to combat this. We must take steps to understand the level of disaffection that these individuals are feeling with their current society, and also help them and their families understand the risks that they are facing. Some of the most difficult conversations I have had have been when I have visited the mosques in my district and had, frankly, wonderful interaction with the participants there and wonderful interaction with the residents there. But we've talked about violent extremism, and I've talked to parents who have said to me, you know, I just don't understand why the government is targeting my youth. And we've had very frank discussions about how it's difficult for any parent to know what their children are seeing on the internet and how they are responding to what is being put forth on the internet and the harm that it does, not just to our society, but also to those families, because they lose their children. They absolutely lose them when they are sucked up by this radical extremism, and only to come back to be dealt with, as they will, by American justice. Certainly with respect to the types of cases that my office have seen, we have seen individuals who started off as relatively peaceful individuals from what we could tell, but were dragged into radical extremism, did travel overseas, were recruited to then return to the U.S. and perpetrate attacks there. We've seen that on more than one occasion.
Okay. And the funding, you're aware of the pilot program that we have going in the Twin Cities?
Yes, a very important program, given the nature of the problems that have emanated from that community and how the devastation that it is essentially wrought within those families and within that community. I think those issues are very, very important. Certainly, I look forward to working with you on finding the most effective way to fund those programs, because they have a lot to teach all of us who are working in this issue.
Thank you. And the last thing I'm going to ask about is sex trafficking, and I know you've done an impressive job prioritizing the investigation and the prosecution of trafficking cases. This is something Senator Cornyn and I, again, have a bill on sex trafficking, which called the Safe Harbor Bill, which is supported by a lot of the groups, which creates incentives for states to enact laws which treat the victims of sex trafficking, the children, as true victims and not as perpetrators themselves. We think we can build better cases that way so people will come and testify against those that are running the sex rings. Could you talk about your work in this area and how you view these safe harbor laws?
Certainly, I think these safe harbor laws are an essential next step in helping the victims of this horrible scourge. My office has been privileged to lead the way in prosecuting numerous individuals who have essentially tricked women through lies, deceit, also coercion and duress, even rape, before they are brought to this country and forced to work here as sexual slaves. It is a tremendously degrading process to these women, and one in which they find it difficult to escape because of either a language barrier or the fact that, sadly, often their children are being held in their home country to force them to behave and to force them to continue this activity. And certainly some of the work I am most proud of has been the efforts my office has undertaken with a number of the organizations that help victims of human trafficking and also with other governments to reunite these children with their mothers after the cases are over.
Thank you. And I also look forward to working with you. We also have a number of domestic victims that I think 80% of the victims actually are from the U.S. as well.
Absolutely.
Especially when you get to the oil patch of North Dakota and those kinds of places where the U.S. Attorney's Office has played a major role. So thank you very much. Thank you for your grace under pressure today. And I hope the chairman will let you get some lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
It's going okay for you, Ms.
Yes,
Lynch?
and thank you for inquiring, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We will now adjourn till 1:35.
It was superb. I don't know when I've been so moved by any nominee for anything.
So the Senate Judiciary Committee taking a break now in this hearing on the Loretta Lynch nomination to be the next Attorney General. They're set to return at about 1:35. Live coverage will continue on our companion network, C-SPAN, where we will open the phone lines to get your take on the hearing and the nominee. Again, all of that taking place on C-SPAN. By the way, if you missed any of the hearing, it will re-air tonight beginning at 8 Eastern, also on C-SPAN.